Okay, check one, two, check one, two, testing, testing. Please let me know in the chat how the sound is. Let me know how the picture is. Please hit the like button. And I'm very grateful that you are here. If you are here now, and if you aren't here yet, I'll still be grateful when you do get here. But tonight, I kind of want to just have more of an open stream because it's been an interesting week for everyone, I would imagine. And I want to talk a little bit about what most people are thinking about, which is some aspect of politics. And I want to talk about decision making because it's very relevant to sentient singularity theory. It's what the very first model that I made was about decision making and sense making, and it's a decision tree essentially. That's the first model that I ever made, and so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to orient and navigate within certain information systems, including the news, and how to look at the future of political science, because I think we're going to inevitably have a radical change in how we discuss politics and nationality and government and the individual and versus the collective, and all these things that we've talked about for eons, I think will eventually be discussed differently than they are today. Actually, I don't think that we're going to continue this discussion forever. I think that we will eventually change the discussion, and then eventually it will be over for various reasons that we'll talk about tonight. So with that, I hope that this stream is valuable to you, and I'm not here to preach to anybody exactly what is the candidate of that you should pick or anything like that. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how you should approach these topics, not what the answer is. The answer is dependent upon the context in which, of the specific aspect of what you're approaching. But I'm not saying there isn't an answer. There is an answer. That's why we're going to talk about the approach that you should take so that you can find the answer. And it might be a different answer for you versus someone else, but there still is a correct answer. It might be the same for you versus someone else, but there would still be a correct answer that you can arrive at, not that I can tell you that fits for everyone necessarily, depending on the question, but we'll talk about it. Please hit the like button, like I said, hit the bell notification, and comment any questions that you would like me to address tonight in the chat, and I will get to them while we are live streaming. But I need some water, so. Okay, so obviously the U.S. election was this week, and quite an election. Very surprising, I feel like, for everybody. I don't know anybody that was completely not shocked, I guess, or wasn't surprised to some degree. But what's interesting about that is that it shows that all of us have some level of disconnection to what is actually going on in the world, and that is intrinsically going to be the case, inevitably going to be the case, and that's fine. But what I want to talk about is how we can make sure that we know what we are connected to and what we know we may not be connected to, or what we know we are not directly connected to. And so, because that was something that I think about every election, and also just whenever I see the news. I used to watch the news all the time, and I went through a phase. I went through like a political shift that led to a moral, I guess, investigation, which led to a theological epiphany, which led to sentient singularity theory. So this is even, politics it was part of the motivation that sparked the journey that led me here. I wasn't interested in politics really. I disagreed with some of the laws that were passed in where I was living at the time, and that's what got me interested in politics. I was not interested in politics before that, and we're going to talk about that as well, and what are the things that we should be most passionate about, and what things do we understand the most, and what causes that understanding, because we are so out of touch and how to judge our own connection to things and our own firsthand experience and understanding of things these days because of our education system, as I talk about on here all the time, which does not allow you to have the opportunity to think. It puts you sitting at a desk, memorizing material for the majority of your waking hours throughout the majority of your most developmental years of your life. And so it's not so much that the things that they teach in school are wrong or right. That's not the point. The point is that they are not allowing you to explore and see immediate feedback through your experiences with the world, with the real world, that would give you wisdom and tell you how, and also teach you how to think, because it is an activity that thinking and decision making that has a specific pattern that is followed every single time if you are actually thinking and actually making a decision. So we're going to talk about what we think are decisions and also what are not decisions, but we think they are, and also what are decisions. That's what I'm trying to say. So we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. But like I said, if you have any thoughts that you want to share, comments, questions that you want to ask, I'm not somebody who hides their politics. My political values and priorities are public, and they are, they're not hidden. So I'm not trying to sit here and say I remain impartial because I'm talking about this publicly. I'm not impartial at all. Let's just get that out of the way. But that's also not the point. The point is not to try and be impartial or to just admit your bias and then you'll be fine. The point is to try and just be true and honest and humble. And that's it. And humbleness means honesty with oneself about oneself. That's all it means. And so that is something that I hope from everybody in the chat tonight. If you care to comment, and also, in just the people around you in this time, because it's very easy to get angry with people during elections lately. I don't know if that was always the case. I think it probably was to some degree, but I think that it's much more the case now, and that's definitely because of social media. And like I said, we're going to talk about navigating the news. So I have stopped following the news on my social media. I don't subscribe, or I try not to. Maybe I've missed one or something somewhere, but I try not to follow news. Okay? And like CNN, Fox, The Daily Wire, MSNBC, it doesn't matter. All of these are organizations that claim to be news. There is a problem with this. And I have this phrase that I came up with years ago, which is that true news travels in niches, like a niche, like that's your niche. And let's look up the definition of niche, just so that clear. So, definition. A position that is well suited for someone or something and the ecological role of an organism in a community. So it's basically, it's your place and of understanding. That's what it is. It's your place of orientation and understanding. And they describe kind of a first and third person viewpoint of it a little bit as, position that's you're well suited for. or an ecological role of an organism. It's the same thing, actually. It's just one of them's from the inside of the niche looking out, and one of them's from the outside of the niche looking in. But any source that claims to be universal news, just blanket, is that concept in and of itself is false. It is an untrue. It is fake news. It's not about whether or not what they're saying is true or not. What the point is that the concept that is woven into the mission of the organization itself is a lie. It's a trick. It might be a trick that they're playing on themselves too, which likely very true, but it is a trick. It's a trick on them. It's a trick on you, and it's not true. So, did you get a haircut? Looking sharp either way. Much love from Carolina. Thank you, trusted source. Yes, I did get a haircut because everybody on here told me to. I'm just kidding, because my wife told me to before everybody on here told me to. But a question: do you think people should watch the news? Okay, well there you go. That's we're on the same page. That makes sense because we're married. But I don't. Watching the news it's not about whether or not you should watch the news. It's about whether or not you should let the news tell you things. That's different. You should be only looking when you want to know something, not letting them tell you what they want you to know, because that is not how you are able to have an organic interaction with the information that is reaching you. It's secondhand information that you, not only is it secondhand information, it's secondhand information. It's worse. It's they're bringing this to you unsolicited. Okay? You're not soliciting it. Even if you click on the news website just to see what is on the front page, or you turn on CNN or Fox or whatever on your TV, none of that is the same thing as solicitation of honest, organic solicitation of information, because you have to know what you're seeking before you find it in order to actually have it be following this rule that I stated earlier of true news travels in niches. This is why you should, if you followed like news, if you're really into, I don't know, zoology, and you followed zoological websites, zoological news would reach you. And you've solicited that information because there's a topic that you actually want to know about. When you click on the news on CNN and you don't, and it's not because something breaking is happening that you want to know about, it's just because you're just turning it on to see what's going on. You're not soliciting information. You're not soliciting information. You're just turning it on because you want to be told information. And really, that means that you want entertainment. And the news has become entertainment. That's what it is. But sometimes they do say things that are true, and sometimes they even say things that are true and relevant. But that doesn't mean that their business model isn't a lie. It absolutely is. And that's something that it needs to be known when it comes to orienting within the news. Is there is no, that true news travels in niches. If you are a boxing fan, follow boxing sources of information, boxing, Instagram pages and YouTube channels and things like that. You will hear about the news of boxing, who won this this match, and what matches are coming up. This is actual solicitation of information because you know why you subscribe to that channel. When you say, I subscribe to CNN because, or Fox because I want to know the news, this doesn't mean anything. It's the same thing as when physicists say things like, the world, everything is energy, everything is matter, everything is, even saying everything is consciousness. It's none of this really helps because it's not enough to say that one of those things and leave it at that, because there's no context being provided. So when you say, I want to know the news, on what? You need context because, as I've said on here before, context is information. There is no information outside of context. And this means that if you're trying to get if you're being force-fed information outside of context, you're going to have issues with being able to understand whether or not you're being misled, whether or not what you're being told is true. You won't know because you don't have any context. They're just telling you. And this is why I think that you should unsubscribe from all news sources. It doesn't matter whether they're right or left or whatever. It's not the point. The point is that the business model is a lie. That doesn't mean I don't check click on articles that are put out by some of these companies. Of course I do, but I search what I want to know about first. Like I was looking up, when the hearing was for the UAP hearing in Congress, and the one that I think it just passed or it's coming up next week, something like that. And I wanted to know. And so I clicked on some article that popped up from, I think it was from CNN. And it tells me exactly what I want to know. And that's it. And that's great. But did I need CNN to tell me that? No, it just rises to the top of the search results. But there would be MUFON, which is like a UFO, organization. I don't necessarily follow that, but if I couldn't get that information off of CNN, I'm sure I could have gotten it off the MUFON website, and I would have gone to them instead. And it would have been a better source, for sure. So this is what I mean, is there's no real such thing as news as a company, as an organization, and as a business model. It is entertainment, all of it. That's what it is. It would not survive as a business model if it wasn't entertainment. And especially in the era of social media, you really don't need any news because we all, are able to talk to each other from the other side of the world and still be an organic interaction. It doesn't have to be some anonymous account on Twitter, but it could be somebody that you speak to I have a friend right now lives in Asia, and a couple of friends of mine who live in Asia. I speak to them in real time all the time. And that's still an organic interaction. I can get news from things that are happening over there if I needed to, or if I wanted to, from a much more organic, source, not just CNN or Fox or something like that. So that's what I'll say about the news, is that that's my recommendation. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to not recommend any kind of, actions on here. That doesn't mean you have to take it. This is what I did. It was driving me insane. I realized years ago, I was like, I'm going to be an informed person now that I'm into politics. And I care now. And I actually did care about, and my care was not because I was told to care, which is another issue today. It is because I actually cared because something impacted me and I realized I should pay more attention. So I followed everything. I was like, I'm going to follow all the right-leaning news sources, all the left-leaning news sources, because that is the way that I'm going to be able to be unbiased and get the truth and be able to see both sides. And then I realized eventually that not only was it just overwhelming, it wasn't helpful. And I started thinking about why, and I realized true news travels in niches. I hear about news in zoology and in physics and in every topic that I'm interested in first from sources that are specifically focused on the topic before it reaches the rest of the news. And that that just shows that you're not going to rely on it for the things that you really know, and for the things that you don't really know, you can't rely on it. And so that's why I would say unsubscribe from all the news. That doesn't mean never look at it. It means if you want to know something like a date or who won the election or what was the I don't know, what was the results of I don't know, the election, like the specific results, like how many points did each person get, that kind of thing. You can look that up. But the thing is that would be somewhere else if it wasn't on CNN and Fox. And it is somewhere else. We just don't look because it's suppressed in the search results because everybody's falling for this, trap of the news. It's a lie. The whole thing is a lie. And it's probably most of all a lie to the people who are, who call themselves journalists. I'm not going to say that they aren't journalists, but I think a journalist is somebody who actually goes to a place and tries to get a story firsthand and then report it. And even then, you shouldn't be just doing that with anything. You should be, if you're a journalist, you should be like a journalist for this topic and in this niche, and not just a journalist that's your job. You go wherever you're told to go, because that screws you up. It means that you're not going to actually understand the places that you go or the people that you interview. You will think that you do, or maybe you won't think that. Hopefully you won't think that, because it's most likely that you don't. But then you would just feel like your job is a waste. So it's kind of like there's no point to it. But I know people that they go to different zoos all around the world, and they interview the keepers and they discuss some of the animals, and they share news about what's going on with certain species, and there's obviously people who their job is to be basically a journalist for boxing. That's their job, and that's fine. But to be or to be a journalist that's focused on, I don't know, war in Afghanistan. But it's like, that's your focus, that's your topic, and you are in Afghanistan. You're not just like hearing about what's happening from the government and then you're reporting on it and that's your job. ChatGPT can do that just fine. We don't need you. What ChatGPT can't do is go to Afghanistan and like actually be there and interact with people, but for an extended period of time and like live amongst them, not even just go there for a week, so that you can get it in the background when you're like this with your microphone reporting from Afghanistan. Last week I was in DC, next week I'll be in DC. No, you're not that's not journalism. You're just a talking head. You're just a mouthpiece. I'm not trying to be demeaning. I'm being honest. And especially with AI, we really are going to need less and less of that. But so journalism is there. I saw Eric Weinstein. He was talking, and he talks about this a lot. And he's like, there used to be some journalistic integrity, and there was a detachment from journalists and politics, and I saw some post that somebody had shared, and it was like the party that journalists, I guess, I don't know who they were, but journalists of the past, 50 years ago or whatever, 40 years ago, what was their party affiliation? It was like unknown. And then what's the party affiliation of the journalists today? Then it listed a bunch of them that people know, and you knew every single one. That doesn't matter. And that's not something that we should be focused on. What we need to be focused on is the fact that news as a business model is a lie. True news travels in niches. That's the reality. And it doesn't matter what the party focus, whether or not you know the political affiliation and preferences of the person who is, on the news. Like, that's not the point. It doesn't help at all. You're going to watch what tells you what makes, you're going to watch what makes you feel good and validated in your feelings, not in your personal understanding all the time. Sometimes it's, that comes into play, but you are going to, if you're just watching news and it's all these topics that you don't personally engage with, you're going to end up just listening to people that are telling you what sounds good to you. And that's it. Not what is true and what is the right context and what is relevant. In fact, I would say they are trying to tell you information that is irrelevant, because obviously, this is a bit of a rant now, but obviously there's a lot of power that comes with being able to reach a lot of people. And so the news business model has become, and I don't know if it ever started as an honest business model or an honest attempt at a business model. I have no idea whether or not it was always just, a tool that for some to use to influence and the public in order to get things done, and that and supported that those people who control that tool want supported. But that is definitely the inevitability of what it is, and not what it is today, but what it always has been. That's the thing. It's never changed. Eric Weinstein, talk about how the news journalism has changed. No, what we call journalism today has changed, but it's not changed in that, now people are just so biased and they weren't back then. It's what changed is we used to think more, I think, about journalists as people who actually went to a place and immersed themselves in the situation that they are going to be reporting about. That's the difference. Now, anybody who just writes their opinions online about some topic that's in the news is a journalist. And that is also just, nonsense. Everybody is a journalist then. And in which case it doesn't have any meaning anymore. There is legitimate journalism, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you're biased or unbiased or outwardly biased or, whether or not you conceal your bias. None of that is the point. You think that it would change people's political opinions if we didn't know Don Lemon's, preference in an election, or, Sean Hannity's preference in an election? It wouldn't matter. You're listening to them already because you already resonate with what they're saying. Like, they don't need to disclose anything to you. And if they did, it wouldn't change anything. It's the wrong focus. And the idea that we should try and remain impartial and have this, I don't know, this, this, I don't agree with being impartial. I agree with being honest and humble and recognizing when you don't know enough about a subject to really speak to it, and that you're better off listening in that situation than you or going and investigating it yourself firsthand than you are actually like giving your opinion. I don't think you need to have an opinion on everything. I think you in fact shouldn't have a strong opinion on most things that people talk about that aren't universal aspects of humanity, of our shared humanity. So that's what I'll say about the news for now. But I would it really helped me to unsubscribe and to recognize that it can be you can use anything. You can use anything as a tool, but that doesn't mean it's the best tool. CNN and Fox and them, they're if I wanted to know the date of the UFO hearing, they're kind of the best tool right now because they're going to be the top of the search results. But if I want to know more about it, they're definitely not the best tool. You would want to go to like MUFON or something where there are people whose job it is to, and whose passion it is, more importantly, not just job, but passion and interest it is to write about the UFO subject. That doesn't mean that they, have it all right. Nobody does, but at least they have quite a bit more context than somebody who just their job is just to write an article a week at CNN or Fox. And I know I keep saying CNN or Fox because I'm trying to be impartial, but I'm not really being. I don't think that that's not what. I'm not impartial, but the point is I just think that both of them suck. Like as far as a business model goes, I definitely, think that the idea of having a news company is the only reason to start a news company is to influence the world in the way that you want and influence people in the way that you want. And it's manipulation. It is not informing, because information is context. The news is intrinsically information outside of context, or at least information that has less context behind the people delivering it, and usually the people who are it is being delivered to, depending on whether or not you Googled, the subject yourself, like me when I'm Google when is the UFO hearing. So these are the core ideas that I kind of want to talk about tonight, is how you orient in and discern what is likely, what should be more trusted. I don't want to say what's more true, likely more true. What should be more trusted by you versus what should not be more as trusted by you, and also how to approach what you should be able, what you should recognize, I guess, as not, what you shouldn't let impact you as much. That's what I'll say. What you shouldn't allow to impact you as much. And because there's certainly a hierarchy there. So we're going to talk about decision-making and hierarchies. So let's see the chat. Nothing new in the chat, but if you want to ask another question, go for it. So the next, what I want to talk about right now, though, is let's branch into decision-making, no pun intended. Actually, pun, I guess, now intended. But let's branch into talking about decision-making, because, there's one thing that happens in every single political election is people start talking about how the two-party system sucks. And it sucks, and it's our system, and it sucks. We don't have two parties. We don't. And we have many parties. There's a Libertarian Party, there's a Green Party, there's a Socialist Party, there's a Republican Party, there's a Democratic Party, there's all kinds of parties. And it always ends up being that there's two main parties. And the reason for that is because of the structure of mind. And how we make decisions. It's not because it's an intentional thing that has been done and that we could fix. You cannot fix it. Every single country in the world that is a democratic country in some way, shape, or form, a representative democracy especially, which is every single democracy because of technological constraints, ends up having two parties, whether it's the Labour Party and the, I don't know, Conservative Party. Is that the two parties in the UK, I think? Or it's the Liberal Party and, I don't know, the Conservative Party. Maybe that's what Australia is. I don't know. And then here it's the Democrats and the Republicans. It's the same two parties everywhere. And it will always deduce down to these two parties. And the reason is, like I said, the structure of mind in how we make decisions. When you make a decision, let's say you have a multiple choice test, and there's 4. Is it A, B, C, or D? You don't look at A, B, C, and D and ever weigh all of them at once. you look at them all, and either you know the answer and you see that it's C and not the rest. That's, by the way, that is a binary. It's this and not these. In which case, you color in the little, C bubble. And then if you don't know the answer and you have to go and try and use, logic as best you can to try and improve your odds of getting the correct answer, you say, okay, well, I know it's not that one. And between these two, I know it's not that one. And, or it's, I don't remember that, so it's not probably that. I know it's not that because I remember they said it's not that. And then it's between one of those two. And, then you flip a coin, or you say that sounds more like what the answer should be. And then you pray and that you got it right. But every single stage in that is a series of binary decisions. The first one is 2. The second one is 2. The next one is 2 until you get until you complete the tree. It's not. You don't have 4 choices at a time. You have 2 choices at a time. You can split those 4 into 2 series of 2 and 2 and 2. And same thing, this, it doesn't matter what number it is. Even if it's 3 and it's an odd number, it doesn't matter. You make decisions always between 2 options. And even when there's multiple options in front of you, the thumbnail of this has 4 directions. This person standing in the fork on the road, and there's, it goes 4 different ways. And that's because our mind is 4-dimensional. But when we think about sentient singularity theory's base model, which is the 4 primary perspectives, which is right here. You can see it's not 4 choices that are totally independent from each other. It's inside and outside, and separate and oneness. This is a binary. This is a binary. Each one of these is also has kind of a binary aspect to its definition as well, and it's defined, mostly by 2 different two additional words that would be in here. And this one can change to some degree, but even this it's a series of binaries. It's like inside and outside of separateness. It's like this, it's what the equation would be, is something like that, if that makes sense. It's like this is one, this is one, and this is one, and then this is one, and this is one. It's still a series of binaries, because this is how our mind makes sense of information. And this is what happens in politics and in everything. And it is inevitable. You will never escape the two-party system so long as we have some type of democratic process. There's always going to be a binary decision before you in the end. And it's like we can say, no, you could always vote a third option. There's no third option. Your third option is not an option. When has a third option that is available ever won? Never. It's never happened. It never will happen. There's going to be no... when I first started getting involved in politics, I tend to lean like libertarian in just my demeanor, I guess. I don't want to control people, but that doesn't mean I don't have my own personal opinions on things, and I share them very willingly, because I think that you, especially if you don't want to exercise your will and enforce your ideas onto other people by force, you have to share what your ideas are. Otherwise, I don't know. That doesn't... It's just a nonsensical way of being, I think. But that's, you have two options if you want the world to be the way that you think it should be, or and that is, if you either share things voluntarily, or you enforce them onto people. But this, when I first started this, I was like, why? How can we make the libertarians win? That was like my thought when I first got more politically involved, and you can't. They will never win. Neither will the Green Party. It's not in the United States, is what I'm talking about. These are third-party options. It doesn't matter really what they stand for, because none of them are going to win. They're political philosophies, and we'll talk about that. Like I said, we're going to talk about political science and the future of political science later on. But they're not actually options. You could say, oh no, they're an option because I can choose one. A friend of mine said that once they voted in an election and they did a write-in, which is not an option, but they told me that they wrote in like a tiger salamander. And that's funny, but is that really an option? No, it's just as much not an option as a third-party candidate. A salamander is just as much not an option because it's not going to happen. The constraints in this system that you're engaging with are not limited to you. So while you could have the choice to write in a third option or to click a third option, it is not actually an option for the outcome of this process that you're participating in. And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't, that you should, this is what I'll say. If you are compelled to write in a third option, it's probably just a waste of your time and you should just not vote. And I'm not telling you that that's a bad thing. Like I said, if you don't know the candidates, and you don't know what they stand for, you should probably not vote. But and if you don't understand like firsthand some of the issues that they're constantly talking about, just don't vote. But you don't need to go there and write in a third option. It's a waste of your time. I'm not trying to dissuade you from having, a different opinion than any of the mainstreams. I'm saying don't waste your time and recognize the relevance of what you're doing in the context in which you're doing it in. The context in which you're doing that in is an election that is going to have one outcome or the other, and it's not going to have another. It's going to have that one or that one, but not that one, or tiger salamander, or libertarian, or Green Party, or whatever. It's going to be in the United States, Republican or Democrat. And you can see this even with, companies as well, like Google versus, other search engines. It's like there's really two search engines that are kind of, I guess, larger. And that's Google and Bing. And one of them is overwhelmingly larger than the other. And but they're really, it's like Google and Bing, and then there's like Chrome and Safari, but that's because we're in the context of hardware, but which is a different environment than just the internet. But within the internet, how many people are using Firefox or DuckDuckGo, or they're all using they're using things like Google, like those second-hand little search engines are using very often Bing and Google, like they're not doing it themselves. So this just happens, and it's an inevitable thing, especially when it is a process of decision making in like direct decision making. It's not like the market where it's whittling down between competing companies. Eventually, you will end up with two, and then you'll end up with a kind of basically a monopoly on the majority. A majopoly. That's what you'll end up with, a majopoly. But it's when it comes to voting and stuff like that, or decision making with a multiple choice test, or deciding what car you want to buy, or deciding where you want to go to eat, deciding where you want to go to school. It's always going to be inevitably a binary decision in the end. And that's just inevitable. So don't waste your time. Recognize the context that you're, of the system that you're participating in. And, I'm not saying there's no legitimate reason to write in a third option, but it would be like it'd be like a mass movement of protest votes, which happens. I saw there was some funny story that years ago, there was some type of there was some person that changed their name, their legal name, to D's Nuts, and they ran in a local election and they got like 9 or 10% of the vote or something like that. But that's just people who are like, I don't know what's best, so that's funny. But it's not an option in the election, even though he got like quite a bit more support than you would have expected. It's not relevant. So it's funny. I'm not gonna say it's not funny, but what's up, memes? Is there is at least one town that re-elected their dog mayor? Yeah, exactly. That's pretty funny. There's definitely funny things that happen. There's a town that I think they say that the mayor is a goat somewhere in Texas, and but is he really? No, but it's funny. But it's just important to recognize, like, don't be upset about a two-party system. Understand why it's there and why you will never break it. It will be eventually broken by, a technological sentience that takes over the world. But it's not going to be broken by us as a political movement ever. And it's not, it can't be. What if you broke that, means our mind's broken and you can't make any decision. It's just what it really means when people say, I wish we didn't have a two-party system, is there's another option that you like better than the two than any of the ones that are going to win, which is still your mind operating on a binary. It's like, it's not, it's not a breaking of the binary system. It would eventually deduce back down to two parties, and they would be the same two parties that are in every single country, which and Eric Weinstein did say this about politics at some point, and this I do agree with him on. He said that most people, in how they vote and their party affiliation and stuff, it's not about policy, it's about aesthetic. And he's right. But there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is that you're being manipulated by an entity that is called the news, that actually is just people manipulating you by using this aesthetic that you resonate with in order to get you to support certain people that would put policies in that you would actually, for the most part, have no idea what they were doing. So and that's what I want to get to next, is what is the way to think about prioritization in politics? Because this is something that is way out of whack. Like, it's way out of whack. And there is a right answer. It's not necessarily the same for everybody, but we're going to talk about, like I said, in Sentient Singularity theory, there's always 2 degrees of freedom. That's why there's a two-party system. There's 2 degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint plus an extrinsic constraint. We look at this model right here on sentientsingularity.com. Go to models. Go to it's like 14 dimensions of maneuvering. And This model right here is a model of space-time and time-space from a more fundamental perspective than just than the 3D space and or 4D space-time that we think about now, where time is thought of as this like linear substrate, I guess, animated linear substrate that you're like in. And that's not how this is viewing it. And also when we're talking about the three dimensions of space that I'm going to talk about here, it's not space in the way that we think about it when we observe, it with our eyes. It's centered around goals, and that's really how you orient, is towards something that is your goal or away from something that is your goal. So you have right here, and I won't get too into like this model in the context of it maybe I will at some point, but for the sake of this discussion, I'm just trying to show this right here, that there's always an objective constraint, a negative degree of freedom, a subjective constraint, and a positive degree of freedom. Same thing here. And this is due to this right here. This is how you orient. Beyond relativity, this is how you orient. And these four primary perspectives, they allow you to distinguish between yourself and what is yourself, what is you and not you, and what is within you and what is beyond you. From there, that translates over to everything. So you'll see four dimensions everywhere that you look when you're trying to navigate within a specific context that is kind of unified in our from our viewpoint that we're looking at it from. So if we're looking at a map, it's like north, south, east, and west. Or if you're looking out at the world from around you, from within you, what you will see is right, left, up, and down. 4. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and yes, there is that, but that's not fundamental. You're starting to branch into a different system there a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But what you really have is, are you going when you're navigating, are you going to the right or to the left, which is a binary, or are you going up or down, which is a binary? It's a series of double binaries. Again, there's no way around this. If you look at a map, north and south is a binary, east and west is a binary. There's no way around it. And if you look at space-time in physics, as it currently is, we have length, width, height, and time. And this is not actually that fundamental of a substrate and it's lacking the recognition of like of the context of the substrate that we're observing, and that is the problem with it. It is assumed to be beyond us true, and that is not the case at all. It is not beyond you true, beyond anyone. That's what I'll say. It's not beyond anyone true that there is length, width, height, and time. These are the perspectives that we observe when we are navigating within a relativistic context. That is it. It's not fundamental, and that's why it's not really as much a series of binaries like the others, because it's not as true, like deep, like fundamentally true. That's what I'll say. And as something like up, down, left, and right, because up, down, left, and right you're accurately understanding the context of these directions because you are firsthand experiencing them. Same thing with north, south, east, and west, but you're like firsthand looking. But relativity is a little different because it just, you're observing something that's ever changing, and that's why things just end up being looking like they're on a spectrum. But I talked about it last stream of why we see relativity is because of the context in which we operate, which is within a animated, moving, sentient being, and also among a bunch of other animated, moving, sentient beings that are moving while this other one is moving. You're a cell inside of a body that's moving. And all those other cells around you are moving while you're moving, and while the being that you're within is also moving. And so this creates a view of like there's never a set. There's never a specific and unchanging relationship structure that you are that you can look at, because everybody's moving all the time. Your cells are moving within you. You're moving within the universe. Universe is moving within God. Everybody's moving within the universe around you. You are in a spiraling soup and of sentience, a soup of sentience. And if you try and look out at the world, you'll be able to just never stop. Like, you'll observe a spectrum. What you're observing is like you are seeing movement, but like fundamental movement, which means like the changing of entanglement relationships. You're seeing the changing of entanglement relationships within sentient beings, and that make up the cosmos. Like, that's why you see relativity. It's very fascinating, actually. I'm not the best at explaining it yet, because I just kind of figured out how to start explaining it. But when we're thinking about this from a more fundamental standpoint, like I just real quick, if everyone were to stop moving completely, stop making what that really means is stop making any decisions, stop pursuing any goals, and just sat and observed where they were at, I think that we would no longer, like, the relativistic perspective that we see of the world would just disappear before our eyes. It would be like so wild. I can't even really comprehend right now what we would see instead, but it would not be what we see now. We would no longer see spectrums. Nothing would appear bigger or smaller or faster or slower or brighter or dimmer. That would not exist anymore. You might not be able to see anything. You can just maybe feel things, but not see. I don't know. It's and by feel I mean like emotions, not physical feelings. But this quadratic 4 primary perspectives, you can see this in politics too. And so if we go to political compass, I remember in school we did this. We're like, let's look at the political compass. What is the political compass? Political compass is this thing right here. It's a quadratic structure of orientation. That's what it is. It's meant to show you where you orient, where you are in the system, and help you orient within it. And so, if you're more authoritarian and right, which really means like authoritarian and, I guess, I don't know. It's like so confusing. We change our definitions for these all the time, but it's like we kind of know what right and left means. It's really like, are you authoritarian and liberal, or are you authoritarian? This should be conservative and this should be liberal. But there's 2 different meanings that can be interpreted by liberal and conservative, as well as, one of them, I don't even think that, I don't like the terms very much, but liberal means like you are not trying to enforce, I guess you could mean you're not trying to, you're trying to live and let live, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It also can mean that you believe that people should be able to do what they like to do. And that is different than live and let live. It's a personal standpoint versus a third person standpoint. It's one of them is about how you think people should be, and the other one is about how you think you should be to people, if that makes sense. And so there's two different definitions of liberal or left. And same thing, with, I guess you could say conservative, but I don't really like the term conservative very much. I think that it's not accurate. But it's in opposition to the term progressive, which I don't like that term either, because both of them are kind of lies. But conservative and progressive are both kind of definitely lies. But liberal, and I guess you could say, I don't know, there's definitely another word that we could choose to be the opposition to liberal, but it would depend on whether or not you were using the first person or the third person definition of liberal to decide which word would best fit on the other side. But libertarian is, you, again, you don't want to enforce your will onto other people. You don't want other people enforcing their will onto you. Authoritarian is that you want to enforce your will onto other people, or you want other people to enforce your will onto other people. But same thing. And neither one of these is entirely wrong, by the way, just so you know. None of them. And we tend to think like that there's one or the other, that there's some things here that are bad. That's not true. And but what I guess what I'll say is, like, notice this it's a very interesting structure of the political compass, because it has the four quadratic base, like, that comes from our four primary perspectives and how we divide the world and distinguish and differentiate and orient. But then it also has this relativistic context stacked on top of it, which is it's like quantum mechanics and relativity. We're like, okay, you're either this, or this, but how far are you to? It's like it's such a representation of the same exact constraints and degrees of freedom that we perceive in physics, because it has this relativistic component to it that's also just fascinating. It's very good structure. That doesn't mean that it's going to tell you that it's the best tool for, I guess, figuring out politics, but it is an interesting tool to help, I guess, if somebody asked you how you wanted to know how you tend to be politically, it could give them a snapshot, but it's not actually relevant. It doesn't actually help you navigate politics. You don't need this thing to tell you what you think at all. If you do, that doesn't make any sense. It shows how you are politically, but that only matters to people who aren't you, like, so it's kind of it's an entertaining thing, and it could be, useful in showing someone else how a snapshot of how you tend to be politically, but it's not useful to you at all. And so that's the most important thing is when it comes to politics, is how do you navigate it, not with a political compass. And you have to understand prioritization, and that is something that can only be done firsthand, which means you cannot get it from the news. If the news is telling you that you need to worry about this topic, and it's not a topic that you would have known about at all if you didn't hear about it from this so-called news sources, the not news sources, that's what I'll say. If the not news sources didn't tell you it, and you would not have known otherwise that it even was a thing, then it's not something that should inform your political votes at all, actually. You should completely ignore it. And that doesn't mean that, you don't vote. It just means like you need to find issues that you understand and would have known about, even if the not news didn't tell you. And so there's two different ways of prioritizing politics. And one of them is from a firsthand personal goal perspective. And this is what I said earlier, is like when you're navigating from in a fundamental way in that 4 degrees of freedom, or that 4 dimensions that I showed you of maneuvering, there's a positive degree of freedom, a negative degree of freedom, an intrinsic constraint, and an extrinsic constraint. Your positive degree of freedom would be forwards towards your goal. Your negative degree of freedom is backwards away from your goal. Your intrinsic constraint is the constraint that is intrinsic to you. It's due to your something that is intrinsic about you. And the extrinsic constraint is due to the constraints that are extrinsic to the system that you're within and that you're operating. Okay? So this is how we operate and navigate any system. But you need to have a prioritization system, and that allows you to prioritize not just and you need a hierarchy system and a system of prioritization, and you need a goal. And that's what you need. And so now let's go into this. So this was the very first model that I ever made in sentient singularity theory. I know this might be a little choppy. I'm thinking in real time here. We're not doing a commentary like some other days. And I have been largely avoiding politics a little bit on here, not for the sake of never talking about it, but because I wanted to talk about other things at the time. But now it's what's in, everybody's mind. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But this is the decision tree that I made of when I first was like, what does it mean to think? What does it mean to think? Because, if you follow this channel, you know that this decision tree that I made was made when I was trying to understand what are the inevitable political goals of a technological sentient being. Basically like Skynet. What is Skynet's goals going to be? Turn us into batteries? Or is it going to go the Elon Musk route and try and maximize human freedom of action? Speaking of, Elon Musk is very much in the news, in the political news lately. But his comments about, what is an AGI or technological sentience going to be a benevolent being to us? Or is it going to be an authoritarian dictator? Or is it going to turn us all into paperclips? And he was like, I think the best goal for it to have would be to maximize human freedom of action. Then that sounds really good. And but I think it's the best you can come up with from the perspective of him. That doesn't mean it will be the inevitable. It's the best thing. I couldn't think of anything better. I'll say that. And I tried. And so I was like, okay, a benevolent libertarian, king, a Skynet king. That sounds like the best outcome, at least better than being turned into paper clips or being turned into batteries or being enslaved and or being just vaporized. But it's certainly the most appealing thing I could think of anybody's ideas on the subject. But I wanted to know, is that going to be inevitable? Because it's not, you don't get to tell what to do. So is it going to come to that conclusion on its own? Why would it? And so you have to start thinking about what's the inevitable goal that everyone has, and how is that going to inform its decision making process and its interactions with humans? And so you have to understand decision making. So I made this. And there are multiple different components to this. One thing is that it's a series of binaries. This is one path, and this is one path. And if you go down this path, you have a binary. And then, depending on what you get here, you either stop or you move on, that's a binary, to this or this. in which case it stops or it moves on and it kind of repeats. Or if it's not this, if statistical on, I mean, this is not, I'm not saying this is perfectly correct. This model was made, in 2014, 15. But still, it's decent enough. If statistical odds does not equal evidence or observations, it does not, or statistical data does not yet exist. Okay, if statistical data does equal evidence, does not equal. I haven't looked at this in years, but you can see, again, you can read it, but it boils down to a binary. I haven't looked at this and actually read these in a long time. But before that, we have this base of 4, which is kind of like, it's like 4 steps of how to think. Okay, this is going to apply to everything, politics included. We're kind of going backwards here, but then we'll go forwards again. What is the thinking process initially, and not the judging process? This is judging. This is like investigating. Okay, and then once you get the results, this is you judging the results. So there's kind of multiple steps to thinking. It's like judgment, and investigation. And then as judging, not judgment, judging. Whoa. And then there's, I guess you could say, judgment. And then before that, there is kind of like, I guess, your goal. I guess, or your goal or question. Yeah, let's say. Oh man, goal. Let's say goal. So there's like 4 components to this, 4 steps in thinking, and you have to have a goal. You can't think about something if you don't have a goal, and then you have to investigate it. And then you have to judge what you find, and then you have to and judging as a process, and then you have judgment as a decision, as a state. So this is a state, this is a process, this is a process, and this is a state. Okay, so 2 states and 2 processes. That again is a binary. It's 2 sets of 2. This is the process of thinking. It is exactly what we do with the scientific method. And let's say you have an idea. You want to think about politics. Let's say it's, I don't know, what you want to think about. You have to have a question first, which contextualizes your goal. And it's like, okay, let's say this was my question that motivated me politically when I first got into politics a little bit, where it was the question that I tried to answer. It wasn't, my initial motivation was also because I felt unsafe and I wanted to protect myself, and I was not allowed. Realized I was not allowed. I did not have the right to do it outside my home and where I lived at the time because of the law. And then I wanted to know whether or not the law had an impact on society, and whether or not they actually did what they were supposedly intended to do. And so I downloaded decades of statistics from the FBI's website and did a data analysis on basically weapons laws, gun control, specifically, and whether or not certain laws impact what they are attempting to impact. And what I found is no, they're not. And There's one though there's one law that did impact things in a statistically significant way, but it was that if it was if there was like a waiting period to get a firearm, or or if you had to go through like a significant process to do it, and you couldn't just walk in and buy one, it did lower the rate of successful suicides. It didn't lower the rate of attempted suicides. It increased the rate of successful suicide attempts, which makes perfect sense. I don't think that's I don't think that is necessarily was it the intention of the law being passed. It doesn't seem to impact like murder rate. None of it did. And but I wanted to know. But if you have this question of like, and it has to be specific. It has to be like, does that law do what it is intended to do? And you have to think about first, what is your default assumption with the law? And then if what you have to do is you can't look for evidence of your default assumption. You have to assume the opposite of your default assumption is true and look for evidence of that. So you have to be like, okay, I think that it's passing I don't know, like there's so many laws that you could think about, that passing gun control bills, I don't know. So, but it would be like a specific one, not a bunch of them. Like you need to really think about it very specifically. So you could say, does passing an assault weapons ban, which is, there's no such thing really as that, but like it's just like guns that look a certain way. If you ban those, then does that impact the murder rate? If your default assumption is yes, it would, you have to look for evidence that it didn't. And if your default assumption is that it didn't, you have to look for evidence that it did. And that's kind of personal to you. And it's because you are part of this, the environment that you are trying to navigate within is your default assumptions. They are part of the environment that you're navigating, that your thoughts are navigating within. Not only that, they're kind of cornerstones to how you go about thinking about the world. And that's not a bad thing. You shouldn't go into it with no bias. Everybody has a bias when they go in, whether it's a very strong bias or whether it's not that strong, but that sounds good, but that doesn't sound good. Or I know that, or I think I know that, versus I think I know something that would be the opposite of whatever it is that, was the preceding one that I just would have given an example of. That it doesn't matter. Like you have an assumption. As soon as you start thinking about whether a question, you have like an instinct as to what you think would be most likely the answer immediately, as soon as you pose a question. And so you have to think about it like this a little bit and navigate within the context of yourself. And so take that, into account when you're thinking about certain issues politically. But there's another thing that we talk about on here that always matters quite a bit, even more fundamentally than kind of that process that I went through of, going and downloading statistics and looking at everything and graphing it out and seeing whether, what the answer would be to the questions that I had, and it had to do with prioritizing firsthand experience over secondhand information. And so if you know that, people are still going to get weapons, even though there's laws against it, because, I don't know, you understand the technology or because you saw people do it and it didn't matter what the law was, then that's a firsthand experience that you kind of have to prioritize above everything else. And with any issue, I'm using myself as an example because, like I said, I'm not trying to like hide my political beliefs. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not going to tell you to agree with me. I'm telling you, if you don't agree with me, look into it. If you do agree with me, look into it. I don't know. Like, you should be thinking about your opinions and challenging yourself all the time. But eventually, you should reach a point though where it's like, I'm more, and where you challenge your ideas and you check yourself less. That doesn't mean you stop, but it means less. People. I think it was Kurt Joy Mungle posted on Twitter something like, and I might botch it, but it was a more detailed and specific statement than what I'm going to say just now. But it was essentially the statement of like, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And he asked the people what, does I think he asked does this, how does this impact you in some way? You can go look at the tweet, but and I think it's a very good question because, and it's an interesting observation but it's something to think about because it's also very easily just kind of put into this like bumper sticker slogan of, and he didn't do that. That's not what I'm saying, but I have seen it, and we've all seen it where it's like, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. But that's not, and while that's not false, you also have to recognize that the more you learn, the more you know too. It's not a contradiction. To realize that there's more that you don't know is also learning more, So it seems like it's a paradox, or that they're kind of mutually exclusive concepts and perspectives to have, but that they're not. The more you learn, and the more you learn, the more you realize, you should realize that you don't know, and that's part of humility. And it's also part of navigating politics. It's like, eventually I realized, when I realized how little I knew about about that one specific topic that motivated my political investigations initially, which was weapons and laws and self-defense rights. That's really what it was. Like, in the United States, they're called Second Amendment rights, but that's what I was coming at it a little bit more specific of, like, self-defense rights and related to weapons laws. And that, man, I lost my train of thought a little bit, but what was I talking about? Exactly. I know what I was talking about, but I forgot my point. That's the problem. I know exactly what I was talking about, but the point, whatever. Well, maybe I'll remember it, or you can comment in the chat and help me out. But you have to just this is my point, is that I was personally motivated because some guys who were shooting at the cops and who were armed with illegal weapons hid in my yard once. And I was, I realized like how important it would have been, it was to be armed in that situation. And also that these people were not following the law, and it didn't seem to stop them from gaining access to these things, that we were, and doing some things that people who weren't breaking the law were being denied to do legally by the law, which was carrying weapons outside of your house for the sake of self-defense. And so this motivated me in this. It wasn't, and then there was like, a lot of things in the news, like mass shootings and things like that were really horrible and made you feel a certain way, and they were all over the news that year, and so that even brought a little bit more to it. And also just the fact that I've been a martial artist my whole life, and self-defense is a passion of mine and a topic that I'm interested in and always have been. And firearms are just the extension of that. They're just the modern sword. Like, they're not, it is martial arts. We don't think about it like that. We think it. Once I interviewed this guy when I was working at PragerU, and I filmed an interview of this guy, and they said, what is your opinion on guns? And he was like, I hate guns. And he's like, well, what are you going to do if somebody has a gun and you don't? And he was like, I go for lots of martial arts training, and I would try and disarm anybody who had a gun. And martial arts, firearms training is martial arts training. It's as much martial arts training as training in sword with the sword. It's just modern and much more relevant. But we don't think about it like that because there's some kind of weird out of context bit of information that we have when it comes to martial arts that is that's fed to us by the movies. There's people who do martial arts seriously and they know shooting is a martial art. They need to do is think about it for 1 second and they'll be like, yeah, shooting is martial art. But if you don't do martial arts and you don't train to fight, then your only understanding of fighting comes from the movies and TV and the news, the not news. And that is secondhand information. You're not going to understand it. So there's this, the definition gets skewed and it literally warps your entire mind because language is mental technology. So now if you have this differentiation between firearms training and every other weapon in the world training, essentially, or just modern weapons and ancient weapons, that's not martial arts versus not martial arts. It's just it's that people who didn't do martial arts had this fantasy view of martial arts and they projected it to you and you just took it in and were misled. But even with this guy, he's like, I hate guns. I would get martial arts training. It's like, wouldn't you want to train in a way that makes you the most effective? Like you're gonna, no pun intended, shoot yourself in the foot when push comes to shove, and it's like the most dire circumstances of your life. But it's kind of funny, but it's also not. But I had this like personal relationship. My point is, I had this personal relationship with this topic. Became important to me because it directly impacted me. The laws would have directly impacted me. I had a goal, and I was and how politics was unfolding informed or impacted that goal. It wasn't just something that the not news told me to care about. And what I realized though, as I started to investigate this, is because I didn't grow up with being exposed to like firearms very much. Like guns and stuff we're not allowed even airsoft guns in my house growing up, and I wasn't allowed to go over to friends' houses if my parents knew they had guns. I grew up in a house that was voted Republican, usually my parents, but were anti-gun, but they weren't anti-gun. They just had no idea they didn't know. They had no experience with them. That's what I'll say. They had no experience with them firsthand. And so no understanding firsthand. But so my investigation into this wasn't what I was told by my parents or anything. Like this was a personal investigation, and it was through firsthand experiences and also, personal interests and activities that I engaged in, like martial arts. So I had this really, really organic and really true relationship with this topic and understanding of this topic. That's what you want when you're trying to pick an issue that would decide your vote, essentially. You want something to vote based on something that's going to impact you. When you're looking at politics from a personal perspective. And this would translate over to everyone in the world who participates in any kind of government, relationship with their government. And it's not a thing that's specific to the US or this issue or that. This would be a universal thing that everybody should think about is when it comes to prioritizing what is important when you're making a political decision. And because when we look at certain models in sentient singularity theory, like this one, right here, where is it? Right here, yeah. this is how our mind like divides the world even a little bit when in terms of like us navigating within a system, because your mind's like looking at the system outside you and the system from within you, and so it divides the world into this like 6-dimensional perspective. So like, and some of this, like I said, you'll see all kinds of things over here that it's just, this is a working document, so just recognize that. Sometimes I jot down things everywhere because it's just the closest sheet that's open and I'm taking notes on something. So I hope it doesn't look too schizophrenic, but this is what I'm talking about. And this is this pattern that is everywhere, and that you look from within a system. It's not just the system of you, it's the system that you're within. So now it's gone from 4 to 6, 4 dimensions to 6, essentially. 4 primary perspectives leads to like these 6-dimensional like interaction that you can have with anything. And this is observable everywhere. So let's take like space-time. In the classical understanding of it, it's like past and present and future, and length and width and height. It's like these are, it's 6-dimensional. I know Roger Penrose says his space-time in his model is like 6-dimensional. I don't know if it's because of this or not, but I don't know how relevant this is to like physics. I mean, it is, but we need to go deeper. We don't need to change what we already have. We need to go deeper than we currently are. But you can see this with 4 primary, the 6 primary and secondary colors. You can see this with color mixing. You can see this with mathematics, with please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. What these really all are is it's a prioritization. Your mind is doing multiple things at once. What your mind is doing is it is splitting information into a binary. So it's differentiating information. And then what it is doing is it is categorizing. It's differentiating, then it's categorizing, and it's also prioritizing. So kind of all at once. And this is, you can, maybe there's one more to that, or there's one less than that. But depending on how you want to look at it. But essentially, those are like the 3 actions that are kind of happening is you are prioritizing, you are categorizing, and you are differentiating. It's this, when you do this, you get a binary triadic structure, which I think is the same thing as a Calabi-Yau manifold, to be honest. I think these are examples, real examples, observable examples, conceptual examples, and perceivable examples of what in string theorists call a Calabi-Yau manifold, which is a 6-dimensional structure that occurs in every point in space and time. What that really means is it's this 6-dimensional structure that is everywhere that you look. Okay, so that's what this is. And so let's look at senses and sense organs, because this will kind of like make this very obvious what's going on. You have your mind, your brain or / mind, I guess. You have your tongue and your skin, and then you have your eyes and your nose and your ears. Here you have sight, which corresponds to this. Smell corresponds to that. Skin corresponds to that. Touch. Ears corresponds to hearing. And then emotion is what I'm trying to get out here. There's something about what is the sense organ that you use to feel your emotions? I don't know. People say it's your brain. I don't know. Maybe, but maybe it's more than that. Some people say it's your heart. So let's just heart. But I don't mean heart like your organ that's pumping blood. I mean like your heart, like that. It's like a metaphysical sense organ. This almost it's the sense organ that is the totality of you. It's what all these make up. So what's interesting about this is that sight and smell and hearing are used to perceive that which is, or used to sense that which is perceived to be separate from you. Okay? You hear something over there, you smell something over there, and you see something over there. Your emotions and your taste and your touch are how you are for senses that basically are for sensing that which is impacting you. Something touches you and you feel it. You taste something when you touch something with your tongue, and you feel an emotion when something moves you, your heart slash mind, your being. This is that which is perceived as touching you, and this is that which is perceived as these white is perceived as not touching you, or that which is separate. Remember, it's inside and outside, and separate and oneness. These are oneness, and these are separateness. And so, and there's an inside and outside aspect to this here. It's that these are outside and this is inside. Okay? This is for perceiving that which is outside you. This is what for perceiving that which is inside you. This is what you feel inside you. This is what you, experience, or this is what you sense inside you. This is what you sense outside you. So it's the same, the four primary perspectives are present here. It's just in a different structure. That we're adding a different something here, which is that we are a four-dimensional structure within a four-dimensional structure. You are a mind within a mind, and what that gives rise to is from the perspective of being inside of it, and probably also from the outside looking in, is you get these 6 dimensions of that you observe in any observation. And it's a trialic structure, because triality is what you observe when you see movement, or it's to convey an action. It's like thought, speech, action. Okay, so it's showing like a progression. Same thing with if you're thinking about generations, you say parents and children. Really, it's binary, but it's like parents, children, grandchildren. But it's really parents, children, parents, children. But it's everybody's a parent. Everybody's a child of someone, and if we're talking about generations that are continuing, then everybody's also a parent of somebody. So it boils down eventually to just this superpositional single structure, like a single coin with 2 sides to it. But as this fractals out, and you're operating in a specific context, you get this. 6 dimensions are important, though, because what this does is that it showcases not just a animated process or that is like your goal, but it's like it's your mind is the animated process. Your mind is thinking, which is perceiving. Mind is like perception, and perception is a process. And so you see that you can break it into this like trialic animated process. And so that process, though, it's not like running or like lifting something. It's more like a series of steps. And those steps are prioritization, differentiation, and oh man, what was it? It was prioritization. First you differentiate, then you prioritize. No, first you differentiate, then you categorize, then you prioritize. That's what it is. So differentiation, it's like this. When you are breaking this down, it's like differentiation, categorization. I'm a terrible speller. And then prioritization. Okay, so like here, and this is the science, like I said, the science of decision making, essentially, or like the process of decision making. And these are the actions that are taking place in the mind as it perceives. And so you have a perception, which is a state, and then you have this take place, or like perception, you could say, is an action, and it's a state, because a perspective is a state, but perception is the it's the action of having that gives you the perspective, I guess. But so I guess you could just say perception is really like the final one here. But here, let's go one merge, one merge, one merge, and that one merge. 1, 2. Oh wait. Merge. Boom. Just so it's easy to see these four. And this, you need a structure. Remember, I said mind is a structure / process. That's what it is. It's an animated being. That's what mind is. It's a being. It's to be is to have a state. Is to be a certain way, is to have a set state, a static state. But being, adding ing to the end of a anything, ing meaning, denoting a verbal action. In an instance of this, it's a result of fighting. So like it's an action. It's animating. To be, definition, is to occur, to exist, to have a state, but being, so to exist, but to have a state that is also acting, is being. Okay, it's a fascinating word. I love that word. It's just the more you break it down, the more you think about it. Being is an incredible word because it seems to be contradictory. It seems to be a paradoxical word, but it's not when you're talking about sentient beings, which is exactly why we call them sentient beings. It's just amazing. I know some people are like, obviously, Tyler, but it's amazing. Sometimes you got to back up and look at something, or you got to zoom in and look at something, and it'll give you like something, a new profound appreciation. But here, when you differentiate something, like I said, it's always a series of two. That's why I said two-party system is inevitable. We're differentiating. We are this or that. That's it. Okay? So we have to have two incorporated into the number two, incorporated into this structure that is going to allow for all of these things. And then you have categorization, which is the series of lumping things into essentially just categories or into groups based on certain characteristics. Okay, so and that you need something different from that different from just differentiation in order to add this like additional context that builds on differentiation, because categorization includes differentiation, right? Obviously, how can you categorize something if you can't differentiate things? So you have to add another. So this is within this. Then you have multiple choices, right? So you have more than two, because this is two. We need more information now to categorize. Okay, 3. That's the next step, because there's one more than 2. You can't. There's nothing in between 2 and 3. on a fundamental level. Then you're going to also have this prioritization structure. And prioritization isn't really adding an additional category. It's more like looking at the current categories that you have and having a different goal with them. So it changes your viewpoint. So what you end up with is you have to have a structure that is divisible by 2 and divisible by 3 and divisible by double 3, because prioritization is you looking at the categories that you have and arranging them in a specific order to essentially that would be dictated by whatever it is that your goal is, that is like well outside of this process. It's like you know it's before this when you're trying to do anything. And so you need something that is divisible by 2, divisible by 3, divisible by 6, and you could also say always divisible by 1. And what is the lowest number that you can have that is divisible by all of these? 6. You get this structure of this, everything is a binary. It's like 1, which is like senses, and then 2, which is like this sensing things inside of you, sensing things that are beyond you, or sensing things that are touching you versus, or that are connected to you or impacting you, versus things that are beyond you. And then you also have to organize these into a hierarchy, and that is dictated, like I said, by your goal. And what's fascinating about these sense things, using the senses to like really make sense of this is, no, that was not an intended pun. Is the order of which ones come first in the prioritization process here is dictated by, like I said, your goal. So there, you do need a goal in order to prioritize anything. And let's say your goal is to eat because you're hungry, and you find some soap and it smells like a strawberry smoothie, and you're hungry, and so you're like, I'm going to take a bite of that. And you take a bite of that soap that smells like strawberry smoothie, and it does not taste like strawberry smoothie. What do? Do you continue to eat the soap? No, you do not. You spit out the soap, and it's not a pleasant experience at all. But that's because your goal is to eat, and you your sense of taste is what, it tells you whether or not something is something that you should be eating, or it informs your action of eating, but most directly. And you're prioritizing taste when you're eating over your smell, because if you were prioritizing smell over taste when you were eating, you would have eaten the soap that smells like strawberry smoothies. But you don't, because you're going to prioritize taste over smell, because you have the goal of eating. And if you your goal is to smell good, my wife bought new soap. I saw it today in the shower, and it smells really good. And I don't know what it is, but it smells like, I don't know, like passion fruit or something. It smells good, and it smells like something you would want to eat. But I bet you if I did try and eat it, it wouldn't taste good. But am I going to choose soap based on how it tastes, or based on whether or not it smells good? No, I guess a better example would have been to say a soap that smells like something that's not food also. But I guess, or you could say soap that does smell like food. So if we said, let's say there's soap that smells like meatballs. I don't know, like popcorn at the movies. That's what the soap smells like. It smells delicious. Do you want to smell like that alone? Because your goal is just how you smell. It's not like to find food to eat. No, you don't. It's like if somebody said, here's some soap, it smells like it'll have you smelling like popcorn at the movies. Well, why does nobody do that, even though everybody likes the smell of popcorn at the movies? It's because we prioritize certain scents when we're just trying to smell good versus other scents. And, it usually smells that you don't want to smell like something that is associated with grease because grease is associated with, not being clean. So we have a prioritization that's happening in our minds with our senses all the time. This happens everywhere with everything. You have to remember this when it comes to politics too. You cannot just, I ask people, I'm like, why don't you like this candidate or that candidate? And so a friend of mine was telling me why they liked, or why they didn't like Trump. That's what they were saying. Well, they were also telling me supposedly why they like Kamala Harris, but like, they're really telling me why they don't like Trump more specifically. And they were like, because he's going to destroy the environment and he is going to get us into, a war, and he's also just out to get, for himself, and he just wants to enrich his friends, and he doesn't care about the rest of the world. He just wants to watch it all burn. First of all, regardless of how you feel about a certain politician, there are certain politicians I don't like, and I also don't know their internal motivations very well. And even if I think I do, I cannot prioritize that information. I have to prioritize what they do, not in, not and how it's going to impact me, not what I think their motivations are and whether or not they seem like a nice guy. That's not the point, because the goal is not to hang out with them. It's like everybody used to say like, yeah, everybody liked Obama because he just seemed like a guy that you'd want to hang out with. It's like, but that's not the point of a president. And some people used to say that about George Bush too. Is like, he just seemed like the type of guy you'd want to get a beer with. That's not the point of a president. Are you going to get a beer with the president? And is that more important than his job? No. So like, don't prioritize that. Prioritize policy over aesthetic, basically. But we don't do that normally. We prioritize aesthetic over policies because it's easy. Thinking is an action that takes effort. It is not something that you intrinsically do. You have to do it. As much as it is as much a process, it is as much an action. It's like a super action. It's the action that you must do before doing any other actions, really. And so it takes effort. But when people don't want to take effort, they just default to like, aesthetic, because you can just stop there. You don't have to think about art to make a decision of whether or not you like it. You just look at it and how does it make you feel? That's it. You don't have to think about why and this, and it's just, moved you. Okay. It's just you ended it at perception. But the point is that my getting back to like prioritization is my friend he spit out everything. That's my point. And including things that he could not know. Remember, you have to prioritize firsthand information above secondhand information. You cannot, which means like you have to prioritize things that you know through experience versus that which you assume or because, of instincts or whatever. I mean, maybe you're right, but that's not the point. You can't prioritize it. And you can't make a sound political decision off of everything. And, it's funny because people say things like, oh, should you be a single issue voter? Everybody is inevitably a single issue voter. Everyone is a single issue voter. Nobody is not a single issue voter because of the constraints of decision making, meaning that it's the process of differentiation, most fundamentally, which is a process that involves this or that, which is it's a two-dimensional system, and you have to pick one to go with. Everyone is a single issue voter. That decision-making process doesn't just apply to picking the candidate based on the candidate outside of the context of your values. So your values are organized into a priority and differentiated and categorized and prioritized in your mind before you start, looking at certain political candidates. And at least they should be, or else like you're probably being manipulated. And that means that there's an issue that's going to be the deciding factor for you. It might change. It might be like this year it's that, and next year it's going to be something else. But in the end, it's going to be one thing that makes the decision. And so everybody's a single issue voter. Everybody argues over whether or not single issue voting is like the sound thing to do or the not so sound thing to do. It's the only thing that you can't do, actually, which is kind of funny. And just recognize it, so that you don't have to start arguing over whether or not we should or shouldn't be single issue voters. Everybody is. And so those things, though, that you're a single issue voter for, they should be things that directly impact you. That's who they should impact. Like directly. Because those are the things that you can know. And that's also how you're just less manipulated, because you know things through experience. I posted on my Instagram after the election, I got a clip of the Not News, which is all news sources that call themselves news sources. And there was just a clip of this woman saying just ridiculous things that were evidently not true based on, they were just saying things about Trump, essentially, that were like, basically, they said he was exactly the same as like Hitler and Stalin and all these different leaders that killed their own people. And I'm not saying that he couldn't ever be like that. I'm not saying that, anybody, you have to acknowledge the fact that anybody could become that, because those guys weren't that before they were that. But so I'm being honest, and I voted for Trump. I'm not gonna lie, but some of my favorite people in the world voted for Kamala Harris, and they're still some of my favorite people in the world. So I don't agree with them on that decision, but I also understand that some of them made that decision by actually thinking about it, and there was a single issue that was very important to them, and okay, fair enough, but it's and we'll get to that in a minute, but I can respect it, and even if I think that, even if they didn't know what the heck they were talking about at all, and they put no effort into it, they just let the Not News tell them, who was nice and who wasn't, then still that that's not good. I don't really respect that. You should have not voted. If you needed the news to help you like understand who to vote for, then you should not be voting. You just don't do things that you don't understand. You'll screw up. Like, you'll make a mess of it. Don't go and take apart an engine of a car and if you're not trying to really understand it, I guess, or if you don't understand anything about it, you'll just never be able to put it back together. Obviously taking apart a car engine is part of learning about a car engine, but you should be like in the process of learning about it at the time. You can't just say all these things. If anybody tells you it's because of this and because of this and because of this and because of this, and that's why I support this person and that's why I don't support that person, and by the way, that's all of us sometimes, so I'm not judging you. So don't deny that you've been like that, because you definitely have been like that, and it's okay. You should admit it. You're being told what to value, what's important. You don't know what is important to you. You just know that what's important to you is the way that is the aesthetic associated with how you are perceived by supporting this person or that person. That's it. And that is most people who vote. And it doesn't, and yeah, there's tendencies more on certain, into certain behaviors associated with certain political aesthetics, more so than others, but there's still the same human patterns on both sides. Most people who vote on both sides are just voting based on aesthetics, and they are being told what is important by the not news on their side, whether it's Fox or it is CNN. I have family members, they vote one way, they vote Republican, and they they claim to value whatever the news tells them to value, which means it's not your values. It's an aesthetic. You value the aesthetic that's associated with those I guess so-called values. I'm not saying nobody has those values. I'm saying you don't, if you need the news to tell them to you. And then there's family members of mine that vote Democrat, and they just get it from CNN instead of Fox. And both of these people are making decisions the exact same way, which is they're not actually thinking. They're just and when they do think, I guess when they are, if you're going to argue that they are thinking, they're not thinking in the context that you would that is most relevant to the decision making process that would give you the most relevant candidate for you to vote for in an election. And so it's not based on party. Like I said on here, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'll tell you who I voted for because of my personal values and goals, and I did go through this process with that, but it's really very few issues that I'm looking at, and then I'm weighing those issues against each other to decide which one is going to be the deciding factor for me, and whether or not it even needs to be. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe my three most important things are that a certain candidate is totally united with me on all three things. Maybe not. In which case, if not, then you need to figure out which one is the priority. And that's the way to make a political decision. But like I said, it does take investigation, but it doesn't. But see, here's the thing: is people sit there and they say things like, I just don't have time to look into every issue. Like, what are you expect me to look into every issue? No. You're thinking about what the not news is telling you about all these issues in the world. All you need to do in life is really focus one time on your political values, and then every now and then, every few years, maybe once every couple years to start, and then every 5 years, and then every 10 years, and then every 25 years, then you can reapproach the subject of your political values. It should be less and less often over time. And it should have nothing to do with the news. Nothing. You don't need the news to tell you which values you need to think about. You need to look at your own life and which values you need to think about. And you also, and this is another thing, is that I think is important, and I cannot tell you that it is as important as looking at your own life and figuring out what is the number one thing that is most important in how it impacts you. And it should be something, I will say, that is impacting a requirement in life, not just a recreational thing. Like I used to, when I moved to California and I thought I was getting freer. And I was like, oh man, I get to smoke weed legally. I don't drink, and I used to never really have much, but I used to smoke a lot of weed in college. I don't smoke anymore at all, and I haven't for many years, but I used to, and I wanted to be able to do it legally, and I was like, I'm moving to California. That is my where I'm going to be free, and the reality is that that's true. I was going to be free to do this thing that I enjoyed doing that wasn't necessary to my life, but it was something I liked. But then I got, I was in dangerous situations that, stakes can be like life and death. And I realized that there are some rights that might not be as fun to exercise, but they do matter more to your life, literally. And so whatever it is that you pick as your single issue, it should be impacting of you, and also be something that is related to your right or your responsibility to do something that is a requirement of your life, not something that is just like, you want to have fun. There's nothing wrong with that. Like those things still matter to me when I look at like, politics. You can vote for, and it definitely matters when you're looking at like specific laws on issues, not like candidates. When you're like, I'm voting for Prop 72 because that one will let me, keep my my Porsche Carrera GT or whatever that I like to take to the racetrack. I don't have a Porsche Carrera, guys. I have like a very old 1990s car. But I know some people like Porsche Carrera GTs and they'd like to take them to the track, and like that's your hobby. Or maybe you like to ride horses, and like there's a law that's going to outlaw horse keeping horses or something. It's like that. Or weed. Maybe it's weed smoking. I don't know. I don't judge you for that. Every now and then, I guess. But sobriety is the ideal. But yeah, I recognize that like some things in life are just for the sake of enjoyment, and that's okay. That's not even okay. It's good, but they're not to be prioritized above that which is essential. But there's also different places for those things in politics. The things that should not be voting for somebody based on whether or not they would let you do something that you enjoy. You should be voting for someone based on whether or not they let you exercise the things that you are responsible for exercising and must exercise in order to, live and your life effectively. But you can go and vote for specific bills and laws or against specific bills and laws based on like things that are less essential. I think that's really like the best place for that kind of thing. It's not that I'm against that stuff, but again, context, like, and the context of for or against a specific bill, that's very different, because you're not getting a being, you're not voting for a being, to hopefully make the best decisions that in relation to you, but you're voting for a thing that's static and like you can it doesn't entertain multiple different issues that it's going to have to involve itself with. It's just like one thing, or at least it's a static thing, which makes it one thing. And so it's, there's lots of things when it comes to politics, and like there is a science of a political science, and it's not what we think of as political science, which is like, oh, we're going to study Marxism, we're going to study communism, we're going to study socialism versus democratic socialism, and we're going to study, the struggle of the middle class versus the upper class versus, no, guys. There is no this versus that. There is no, we're going to study the struggle of the individual versus the collective. That's not even how politics should be arranged. My most like controversial, probably political opinion, and you don't have to agree with me, and I'm not even saying this is definitely right, but I do think it makes an enormous amount of sense, is that only married people should be allowed to vote. And because voting is not a responsibility, voting is a tool. Remember that. Like voting, people say like, do your civic duty, go vote. Voting is a tool that it's not an ends in and of itself, it's a means to an ends, and the ends is a good government that lets you be good and be prosperous as much as possible. And that's the goal. And as soon as democracy is counter to that goal, like is intrinsically counter to that goal, not sometimes counter to that goal, intrinsically and counter to that goal, democracy is not a good thing anymore. We hold it up as this like, sacred thing, and it's all it is you're just it's just our participation in government on like the most in a representative government on the most basic level. You are like an elected, you are an electing official, not an elected official. You're an electing official who then elects an elected official who then makes decisions. But you are part of the electoral process. You're part of the government when you're voting. And not everybody has the right to be a congressman, nor should everybody have the right to be a congressman. It should probably be like, somebody who fits a certain characteristics or criteria, I will say, not characteristics, because that makes it sound like physical characteristics. I mean, like, you should, there's not anybody should be allowed to be, you should be a citizen, like I think you should be married. You can't be president. I'm not saying this is right or wrong because it's a bit arbitrary, but it is. I get what they're getting at. It's like you have to be 35 years old to be president of the United States. It's not just your right to be the president of the United States. You have to be 35. I'm not saying that that's a good rule or a bad rule, but it's a rule. And so the point is not everybody could be the president. You can't. Elon Musk can't be president. He wasn't born here, and in the United States, even though he is a citizen. Should you have to be born here? As a citizen of the United States, from the start? Probably. That's probably a good rule. Is the 35 rule good? Probably. In general, I'm not saying, that there aren't exceptions of people that would be better than someone else, Certainly there's people who weren't born here that would make better president than people who were born here. Some people who were born here. Certainly there are people who are under 35 who would make a better president than some people who are over 35. But, in general, older people, wiser, and usually, and not always, but usually, and that's important. And, but it's really about, priorities is like, like I was saying earlier, is there's no individual versus the collective. That's a destructive perspective on government. You're pitting a nation against itself. You don't want to do that. It's not the rich versus the poor. You're pitting the nation against itself. You don't want to do that. It's not men versus women. You're pitting humanity against itself. You don't want to do that. And what you want to do is you want to unify everybody, but you do that through a specific structure, which is which is marriage, really. Like, and that's part of why I think that it's a good idea to have only married people voting. I would give up my right to vote even if I wasn't married, if it meant that only married people would vote, because they just value peace and growth intrinsically almost more often than people who don't. And when it comes to democracy, it's not about exceptions. It is about rules. That's the point. It's about majority. And so if you're going to use that tool, like, you want to set it up so that the majority has a specific value set that is good, that leads to a good government, which is like growth and peace. People who are married don't usually go rioting and smashing up, the local grocery store. They need that grocery store to feed their kids, and they usually like huddle together on the couch, even if they don't have kids, and like, stay inside if some crazy stuff is going on outside. And they don't go outside together and riot. Single people are much more likely to do that. And I say that as a person who has been single and as a person who has been married. So it's not like I'm, a lot of people are like, yeah, but you're just trying to exclude people. Yeah, but like not just for the sake of it. It's not about me. I'm not trying to exclude other people who are not me. If you could vote tomorrow, if we could pass a law tomorrow, if I was the president or king or whatever, I don't know, and I could just write the law, or a law was proposed to me and I was president, and I could veto or I could sign, a bill, and the bill came before me and it was like only married people would be allowed to vote. I would sign that even if I wasn't married, and I would give up my right to vote for the rest of my life, or for as long as I wasn't married. Then get married, get your right to vote back, get divorced, lose your right to vote, get remarried, get your right to vote back. So also, like, it recognizes that Like it's a choice. There's a choice aspect here of like, are you going to choose to be in this group or are you not going to be in this group? And it's not like some intrinsic characteristic of you that is inescapable. I know that marriage is hard sometimes, and I know that our gender dynamics is screwed up. It's screwing up our politics though, and that's the problem. Is that our politics is the biggest problem with our politics right now isn't like any certain political candidate or party, even though there's issues with both. And I do believe there's more issues with some candidates than others and more issues with some parties than others. But that's still not the point. The point is that the biggest issue in politics is that it is turning into a gender war. And nobody wins in a gender war. In fact, everybody loses in a gender war. There is no, and you can see that. It's like in this past election, you had the right being like, men, you need to go out there and vote. And people were like, women, on the left, they would be like, women, you need to get out there and vote. And I mean, to some degree, you would want equal men and an equal number of men and an equal number of women to vote, right? And if one side has like women definitely tend to vote more than men because they're just more collective. Like they just do things together. Like women do things in herds. Everybody knows. It's like some movie that's funny where the guys are like looking at the girls in the high school and they're like trying to find time to ask them to prom or something. And they're like, why do they always move in herds? I forgot what it is. I think it's super bad. And it's just true. And it's not a bad thing. It just is a thing. And there's good things about it in the right context, and everything is bad in the wrong context. But you want, like humanity needs men and women. You want equal men and equal women. Well, what's an easy way to do that? Only married people can vote. But also, but if you don't have that, like politics will descend into a gender war, and that screws up. It further screws up our gender dynamics. But really, it's our gender dynamics that are thrown off by like technological changes that are then screwing up our gender dynamics, and it's trickling into our politics, and it's really screwing up our politics. All these things about like racism and things like that in politics, I'm not saying that they never are issues, but in today's time, in most countries, they're not that are like more developed, I guess, or I guess more technologically modern. They are not as much of an issue as the not news usually tells you, and politicians usually would kind of, you would think, if based on listening to how much it comes up in politicians' talks and on the news, it's because people are trying to manipulate you with things outside of you, and that's why it comes up. But what's causing it to even be really there in the first place is, and a lot of these things too, is it's our gender dynamics, and it's really pitting men and women against each other. And like, as we get more and more politically, like, amplified over time because of social media and stuff, and technology connecting everyone, it is going to become increasingly apparent that gender dynamics are like way more fundamental to our political issues than people think. It's even issues that we call like racism, like even talking that topic in society is manifesting due to like, it's not manifesting. There are instances of where like race is an issue, whatever you would call race, I don't really know, or tribalism, I guess you could say, is an issue. Internal tribalism within a nation is an issue. That's what I'll say. But that's not very rare, but it's rare. It's not as common as or as important as everybody makes out, as you would think, just based on the narrative. What it really is happening is that the not news is preying on people's aesthetic and making it so that there's people who care about people who are victims and people who care about people who aren't. And this is preying on gender dynamics and gender instincts. It just is. I'm not even saying any political like message. It just is the case, and it's for both sides. I mean, there are politicians and people in media who will prey on the instincts of men and motivate them against women, and there are and into this like frenzy of like of competitiveness in a not healthy way, not which is like not about like boosting yourself up. It's about like being better than that person. That's not healthy. Being better than you were before, that's very healthy. But being better than that person is not healthy. And if people will be like, well, no, like competition is good. Like competition is like being better than that guy is not, and focusing on that is never good. Being better than you were before is good. And you can use competition as like a mechanism of improving yourself, but and measuring your improvement, or you could use it beating others as your motivation, and one of them is good and one of them is not. And there are people and I guess just communities that focus on that kind of thing, and it's toxic masculinity. That's what it is. There is that it does exist, but it's not what most people call it. What most people call toxic masculinity in the not news is not usually toxic masculinity, but there is a toxic version of masculinity, I guess. But it's not really masculine. It's like feminine. It's toxic masculinity is that which we call masculine, but is really feminine, and that's what toxic masculinity is. Like femininity means like focused on others. It's reactive. To be feminine is to be reactive. So like to be reactive to others. So if you're focused on others, you're being feminine. If you're trying to be better than that guy, and that's your focus, that's feminine. If you're trying to be better than you were before, that's masculine. Just because it is, I don't know, it has an aesthetic of like masculinity doesn't mean it is masculinity. Same thing with femininity. Femininity is, there's feminine is not what we think of it as today. Like, I don't know, mini skirts and the color pink, whatever. I don't know. Like, that's not femininity. Femininity is like, it's like submissiveness and like caring about other people and being submissive, and but like feminism is about like not being submissive at all, but still you're just being reactive, and it's like that's just toxic. You could call it toxic femininity, but it's not really femininity. Just like truly toxic, quote unquote, masculinity is not actually masculinity. It's like, it's not. But our gender dynamics is screwing up our politics. That is not, you don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat or a Labor Party or whatever party, or Trump fan or Kamala fan. I don't care. Like if you don't see that, then think about it more. And like the last thing that I will say, when it comes to like politics and judging a political candidate is about like the extrinsic constraints. So the intrinsic constraints when you're judging a candidate is what are they going to do that impacts me, that is about an issue that I have firsthand information, firsthand experience with, and that I am prioritizing because of its priority in my ability to live, effectively. And sometimes that could be the right to do something that you only have to do very rarely, but when you do, it's very important. Or it's something the right to do something every day that you have to do every day. But it's, not like life or death, but it's like, paying, I don't know, your ability to have a car to get anywhere. Something that's just an everyday thing, but it's not necessarily life and death, but it's critical to your being, versus, some things like the right to bear arms, hopefully you don't live in a place where you have to use a deadly weapon every day, or even where you might, or where it looks like you have to use a deadly weapon every day. If that's the case and you're like truly scared every day, then you should move to a different place. But also you can recognize that unexpected things do happen anywhere, and when they do, like, you might want to be prepared because in that instance something is critical. So both of those things are very legitimate perspectives to take. But those are intrinsic constraints. They're about you. Then there's your extrinsic constraints that are about the candidate. And those things are not really, they're about the candidate, but they're not about the candidate themselves. They're about the candidate within the system that you're within. And for the United States, that's the Constitution. So while some, like, you could, if you're going to look at a candidate and be like, what do they think about, certain issues, and you aren't already going to know that you're going to prioritize something that directly impacts you intrinsically, and very immediately, then you have to kind of, if you're going to still judge effectively and you want to vote, then you have to look at the extrinsic constraints, which is what is their goal, which involves two things. One is what they state their goal is, and which everybody's going to say good goals, but like you have to judge their goal too. And so how you judge their goal in the United States is based on whether or not it's, I guess what I'm saying is, like, the Constitution is the extrinsic constraint in the United States. In other countries, it's not. And in those cases, you would want to prioritize, I don't know, people keeping their word. So like if they swear to do something and they do it, then that's good. But if they swore to do something and they didn't do it, and then they're running again, then take that into a consideration. But in the United States, it's we have the Constitution, which is like that is something that is the extrinsic constraint. So what are their opinions? I guess what you would look at the candidate and you'd say, what are their actions, but in regards, not just their speech, because everybody says things like, I, support, the middle class, and, or I, want billionaires to pay their fair share. And then most of your donors are billionaires or something. And then you're like, I want, but not even, that doesn't matter. What matters is like, then you go and you, like, I don't know, you pass a bunch of tax breaks for them or something, and loopholes. And that's not even wrong. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but I'm just saying, like, they just recognize that there's a difference between what politicians say and what they do. You should always look at what they do, not what they say. And if all you have to go on is what they say, you don't really know. You might as well flip a coin when you vote at that point. I'm not going to lie. You're just going to be voting based on aesthetic, in which case, I don't even know, maybe don't vote. But, or, just recognize that you're guessing. That's what I'll say. But if they have a history, you can look at what they've done, you can completely ignore what they say. You don't have to know Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's perspective on the Second Amendment. You don't have to look at the news and what they say and listen to their speeches in order to know what their perspective is. In fact, it will not tell you their perspective. It will not. But if you look at what they do and what they've done, you will definitely know. Same thing with like freedom of speech and in the First Amendment, and whether or not they supported surveillance, bills like the Patriot Act or something that's like surveilling the United States citizens, and whatever it is. If you look at their actions, you can know, and if you can't look at actions, you don't know. So just recognize that. But in the United States, the issues that are in the Constitution are more important. Or they should be prioritized. I'll say this: they should be prioritized above issues that are not. If you're judging a candidate based on extrinsic constraints, not intrinsic constraints to you. If you don't know what Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is going to impact you personally, but like you still want to make an informed vote, you need to look at their history of actions in relationship with those issues that are listed in the Bill of Rights. And that's all you can really do. And that's still an informed vote, but, and you have to, but it's still related to like a prioritization, which is you prioritizing this based on an extrinsic constraint, which is, that they swore to uphold that. So there's like multiple aspects here. That's like, do they keep their word when they swear that something's true? Are they being honest? When, do they understand the foundations of what make the nation that you live in different from another nation? Or, what is the core rights that are outlined as being, important to a good government according to your nation? These things you can look at with their relationship with them, but you have to look at their actions. You can't look at what they say. And you have to either be like, you have to either prioritize that document, whatever it is in your country. In the United States, it's the Bill of Rights, or you don't. And you say, screw it. I actually don't care about this. I want to ban weapons and I want to censor speech. And because I think that will lead to a more peaceful world. And if you genuinely believe that, I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. But you can't be like, then you have to, I don't know, like you're not voting in a prioritized way anymore, based on an intrinsic constraint or an extrinsic constraint. You're voting based on like assumptions and aesthetics, most likely. I mean, maybe you went through a thinking process with a specific issue that you don't agree with in the Constitution, and I'll listen if like that's you. But I'd be curious. But I mean, it's just based on how you feel and the aesthetics of how something sounds, it's not enough. It was interesting. Like Elon Musk was like talking to Don Lemon in this interview that he gave to Don Lemon, and it was just, he's talking about censorship, and Don Lemon was basically saying that, he was advocating for censorship, and and Elon Musk said it. He's like, you're advocating for censorship. And he's like, no, I'm not. He's like, yes, you are. Do you want to just, are you not supportive of the First Amendment? Because that's what it sounds like. And he's like, no, I support the First Amendment, and I don't want censorship, but, and then he went on to basically say, like, we have a responsibility to like silence certain opinions and voices and stuff, which that's why you can't listen to what people say, because they're, he's not, I'm not saying he actually is being dishonest. Like, he might not be, and just he might not recognize that he's being he's contradicting himself. I think for most people that's the case. I've caught myself doing that, but it's like, then don't even, then what you should do though, the humble thing to do is to like back up and be like, okay, actually, like somehow recognize that, like assume for a second that you actually don't support the First Amendment, and think about like what would be the evidence that supports that you don't support the First Amendment, and look for that in yourself. And then maybe you will find it. And if you do, like, just be humble about it, which means being honest about oneself with oneself, and being like, okay, actually, yeah, I don't support the First Amendment. And I would respect that way more than somebody who's like, I support the First Amendment, but I support the Second Amendment, but no, I just come out and be like, I think we should get rid of this First Amendment. I think we should get rid of the Second Amendment. Just do that. That's now we can have a talk, because now we're being information that's being conveyed is true and coherent. so we can build something, Dennis Prager, who I used to work for, he said something all the time that just, it was so, I think about it a lot every election. And he said, I prefer understanding to agreement. And that is something that I think all of us should really think about when it comes to politics. Don't think about whether or not you should about trying to agree with somebody else or trying to get somebody to agree with you. Try and understand yourself and try and understand the issues and understand how to think about prioritizing, what is going to be the deciding factor for you and your vote, and think about what the purpose of voting is, the goal of voting, and again, it's like the not news tells us, and the school system, which is also, by the way, it's just the not news. It's just like, we just call it a different name. It's just a bunch of out of context information that you're told that is very important, that you have to care about, and you're just forced to sit there and listen to it. And it's the same thing as the not news. School is the non-education system, or it's not even that. It is the anti-learning system. That's what it is. It's like, doesn't allow you the opportunity to learn how to think. And so it just spoon feeds you your whole life. It's like as if I never let my daughter feed herself, and I never let her pick her own food and taste new things and try and eat a new meal. She would never learn. I would just be like, here, this is good. Don't eat that. I'm not going to let you even taste it, but don't eat that because that's bad. But here, and I just spoon fed her whole life. Isn't that going to result in a very effective person? No. But those people will be like, I'm educated. But then my point is, the not news tells us that democracy is like good and non-democracy is bad. Every single political movement is democratic to start. Every single one. And democracy is a tool that can do great things and improve the government and push it towards the good. And it can also be, it can also result in eventually leading to, horrible things happening, a very terrible government. And it's not in contrary. It's not democracy versus authoritarianism or dictatorship. It's democracy leads to dictatorship always. Do you want a good dictator or a bad one? Yeah, and yes, you want a government that has checks and balances system, but even the president is dictatorial to some degree. You can say, oh, we don't have a dictator, and yeah, maybe it's not as powerful of a dictator as Putin. There's more checks and balances against the president of the United States than the president of Russia. But that doesn't mean there aren't checks and balances also against, the president of Russia. There always are checks and balances. You have a populace that responds to what you do. There's checks and balances, trust me. That's why dictators get oftentimes forced out by their own people, even if they're like Stalin. But democracy is just a tool. And the not news tells you, and the school that is like the anti, learning place tells you that it's this sacred thing that defines what is good. And that is because people are trying to manipulate you. And most people are just being manipulated themselves in this process. But there is someone at the top that knows that most people are going to vote for this thing if they can present it through the not news in a certain way. And they'll use you. Democracy is a tool. It is either going to be a tool of the nation, which is not made of individuals, it is made of families. That's what makes a nation, not individuals. Individuals make families, families make nations. That's it. There is a step to uniting the collective and the individual, and it is the family, and you should prioritize it. Family means marriage. I don't mean you have kids. I mean, you're married. Maybe you have kids, maybe you don't. But marriage it's the glue on of society. And it's the nucleus, but it's also like the glue on. It holds everything together. And kids, the fact that you have kids that does not hold everything together. You can have kids and not be married, and you will not that you're it's very different than if you were married. And I would say a married couple and I mean, it's ideally like people who are married and have kids, like those are going to be people who most are aligned towards like growth in the future. But if you are, and peace, it's like marriage is the peace part of that. But most people who get married try to have kids or want to have kids. And not everybody can, but even the ones that can't usually want to. And speaking as somebody who's been there, before and struggled with that, that is it. It's rare that there's like a couple that's like, we're gonna take over the world and just be out for ourselves completely, and also, I don't know, we're married and we have kids, or we're married and we don't have kids. It's just not the same kind of thing. Being married is like you're already committing to another person for life, so you're already like prioritizing others, and really like in action, not like saying, oh, I care about like other people, and some people just care about themselves. And that's there's the not news paints politics like that. It's like these people care about only themselves, these people care about other people. And so if you're going to vote for the people that don't you want to vote for the people that care about other people, it's like you're being manipulated because you don't want to be the person that looks like they don't care about anybody else. You're just being manipulated through aesthetics. It's very easy to do if you don't know how to think and you don't prioritize and differentiate and categorize things properly, and contextualize things properly, or perceive the proper context of things. That's, context is information. And, people say things all the time is like, we need to pass like, I'll vote for, they don't believe, this side believes in the environment, this side doesn't care about the environment. Let me tell you something. Everybody lives in the environment. As soon as the environment starts to not be so good, everybody that lives in the environment cares about the environment. But that whole issue, if you don't understand specifically, because of direct feedback, what is going to make an impact on something, then you're just being manipulated. And I'm not making an argument for global warming or human-made climate change or against it. I don't think that really matters. God's will be done, and like it doesn't matter, whether or not we, use more or less, burn more or less oil. I do think that we should try and have a healthy world to live in. But even then, like that just makes it more pleasant for us. It's not going to doom us or save us. It's like, it's just going to make this process more pleasant. And I'm all for that. But, when they say, oh, if you don't care about the environment, what that really means is like, you don't care about other people and other things, like other animals. You don't care about other beings. I care about other beings. You just care about money. Like which means you just care about yourself. It's like, this is not true of anyone. There's no one that does not care about the environment. And there's no one that does not care about anyone else. There are people that are selfish in certain contexts, more so than others. In some contexts, it's healthy to be selfish. In some contexts, it's not. But so that's not even to call people, they're out for others. They're not, that person's out for themselves. This is, everybody's out for themselves and everybody's out for others. That's just a fact. Everybody's human. And it's just important to think about things a bit and think about how to think about things And it's the same process. And it takes action. And you don't need to watch the news, and you don't need to get informed about what's going on the other side of the world in order to know how you should vote. I'm not saying you shouldn't read those things, because you are interested to some degree, and maybe, you do want to get involved somehow. I don't know. I'm not saying that they don't matter either. I'm saying that if you're not personally firsthand experiencing it, you shouldn't prioritize it, because you don't know that you know it for sure. They could tell you that there is a nuclear war going on the other side of the world. It might not be true, and it might. But you don't know. You just don't. And so it should never be the priority. And if you think about the decision process that decision tree that I had here at the very top, you have this. This is the context of everything, always, every single thing. Everything you want to think about, do this first. Ask yourself, what is the first question? And when I say what is the first question, I mean the first question of any question, not the first question involving this specific issue. First question of any question. That's the first question. And that's the answer. It answers itself. And then you get to the next question. What is the truest thing that I know? I am. From there, everything has to be fit with that, within that prioritization structure. Everything after that. And there is a first question to ask in specific issues, but you have to set a goal first. And that goal has to be contextualized within the context of I am. And or else you're going to not make any sense. And I just have seen so many people just not making any sense. And I'm not saying that if you voted for this person, you make no sense, and if you voted for that person, you make sense. No. There are people who voted for Trump, and their reasons make no sense. Or their reasons are they did not think about their decision within the proper context, and they were manipulated, basically. And there are people that voted for Kamala Harris that had the same thing, and there are people that really thought about it and voted for Kamala Harris, because I don't know, she supported some issue that directly impacted you, and it was very critical to you. And you prioritize it above the Constitution, and maybe you should. I don't know, but but then there are people that did the same thing, with Trump, and that's what matters. It's you should go through this process, and it does. You don't need to know anything about what's going on in the news in order to do this. You don't. If you want to understand your political views and understand politics, you don't need to be constantly informed. You need to be informed about yourself. And that means you need to be have the proper goals for your own life. And that's kind of I guess the next thing that I would get to is I push marriage a lot on this channel, and because there's no society without it, guys. I know that that's also a talking point in politics. It is also even more fundamentally true than anyone who even repeats that talking point knows. And there's just no such thing as civilization without it. It is the first technology, but it's godly technology. It's not satanic technology. And it allows for a degree of peace and growth that is otherwise not possible, and wisdom that is otherwise not possible on a macro scale. And I'm not saying if you're sexually attracted to the opposite sex, it is your responsibility to get married to the member of the opposite sex. I do believe that. If you think that we have responsibility to others at all, which you should, because we do, then that's the first and foremost step that you take to do that, because it supports next generation, it supports somebody for their entire life, and it supports peace for everybody around you. It's funny because the world, people are like, oh my gosh, if Trump gets elected, the world is gonna, the country's over, and or if Kamala gets elected, the country's over. Let me tell you something. If you live in a neighborhood that is all married couples, every single house basically is married couples around you, you're going to live in a really nice place to live. You really will. It doesn't matter how those people voted. You will live in a nice place to live. And you also live in a place of people who go through the processes of life that are necessary to actually, be a coherent group that is also that is also growing to the next generation. And like, there's nothing more critical in as far as processes go for humanity itself. I'm not saying everybody has that specific role. God definitely made people who are exceptions. If you are sexually attracted to the opposite sex, you are not an exception. You are not. If you are not attracted to the opposite sex, you're an exception. And you are meant to do something that is supportive of the same structure as the marriage structure. You're not meant to be in opposition of it. You're meant to be supportive of it in a way that's exterior and is special, But if there's no one who is, there is a trueness to morality. I don't want to, we talk about like, is morality science? Is it philosophy? Is philosophy science? Is political science science? Not in the way that it's taught. But what we really mean by science is like true. Is there a true political way of being? Is there a true way of being that is there a political way of being that is true? That is, and by true, I mean like generative and good and honest and accurate and many different things at once. And I mean it as like a superpositional structure / being almost. And there is a right and wrong. And there's a right and wrong choice in politics even. And that doesn't mean that there's a right or wrong candidate, but there is a right or wrong candidate for you based on what you know in the context of what you need to do in your life and, where you're currently at. And it's not just who you think it is. There is one that is even kind of beyond who you would feel. I would say not who you feel it is. There's someone beyond who you feel it is, who is the right choice. And you need to think in order to determine who it is. But marriage, though, is like it's a context of politics. And as soon as the politics loses that context, there's no more society. So there's no more politics down eventually. Yes, it takes generations to fall apart. Yes, it does. It takes sometimes many generations to fall apart. And the parts of it that don't fall apart are the parts of it where people get married and stay married. Those are the little groups that continue on. And we don't learn that in school, and you don't learn that in political science. You just take your little test and it tells you, like, are you more authoritarian? Or are you more libertarian? Are you more right? Or are you more left? Are you more closely aligned to Hitler? Or are you more closely aligned to Rand Paul? It's like none of them. You don't even need to know. Why do you need to know how close you are or how far you are from another person? You need to know like what is important, and then you need to know that, because that allows you to prioritize issues. But knowing what's important means like you need to be at a stage in life where your priorities are permanent. And by permanent, I mean permanent and universally relevant. And that's what marriage does. It's like it realigns your priorities and lets you see like the context of things and be like, okay, actually, like, my priority isn't to just make as much money as possible so I can get a sports car so that I can attract, girls at the bar and then sleep with them and enjoy myself and then never have to have the responsibility of kids, and I can just vote to watch the world burn when I don't really like it anymore, or because it's entertaining. But you don't do that when you have a spouse to worry about. You just don't. And you also see the other half of humanity. Humanity is not men or women. It's men and women. And it's also married people and not married people, but it's I will talk about sexual orientation at one point, but because what we call sexual orientation these days is actually, we should call it sexual preference. And that's not the same thing as orientation. Orientation is how you fit within a system. But it's not just how you fit within a system, it's how you fit within the system. And so you have to know what the system is in order to do it. And so I'll tell people here, but there's according to Sentient Singularity theory, there would be 2 sexual orientations, not 3. And I mean, I guess it'd be that's what it would be. I mean, we'll talk more about it one day. We're going to do a whole stream on it. I'm going to do a video about it. And it's not like there's infinite ones. It's not like there's 3. There's not, and even the 2 that are the ones that I'm going to propose as being the 2 sexual orientations, objectively, they're not straight and gay. They are not that. Those are preferences. They're not. Yes, they kind of got close to what people, recognizing that there's this somewhat of this difference, but they're not accurate enough definitions. They're not defined accurately enough to allow you to build a coherent system. So you end up with building on an incoherent, you end up building on a fuzzy foundation. And as you do that, you get more and more incoherent. It's you're having tolerance stacking issues in language. And then you end up with the alphabet soup of sexual orientations that's never ending, and genders that's never ending. And there's only two genders. Gender is feminine and masculine. That's gender. That manifests in different levels of being. On the hadronic level, it's neutrons and protons. That's what it is. On humans, it's male and female. And there are people who have physical differences and stuff like that, but who are they're harder to classify based on a single rule that's physically defined. But the thing is that's because you're looking at something and you're defining it wrongly. It's like saying, when did life begin? It's what is life? If you're defining it as something that's multicellular being, that is it has metabolism and this and that, then sure, you know exactly where it began. It began with cells because you defined it into as such. But if you're no, actually, let's think about what it means to be to be a living or life, which means to be alive. What does it mean to be alive? It means to be sentient and moving within and I guess animated within the stage of relativity. And if that's the case, now it's well, maybe it's more than just cells and multicellular beings and stuff. It's maybe it's atoms and molecules and things beyond just where we are at as well, technological sentient internets that wake up one day. Then they're alive. So you have to think about your definitions in these things, and but we're going to talk about these issues more because there is a political science. The science of the true way of being politically is to actually think about politics and not be told what to parrot. And you don't need to watch the news. It's not news. It's entertainment and propaganda, no matter which channel it is. And It's intrinsically such. It's not like, even if they didn't have that goal, doesn't matter. They're choosing what to tell you about. Okay? Even if they like don't give an opinion inside there, it's like they're still choosing what to tell you about. That's their opinion, is that this is important and that's not. It's so built into the system you can't eliminate it. It's the same thing with school. You can't just have them teach the truth. You will have them misinterpret it. They won't understand it. I mean, look what happens. You start in school and you're like, male and female. I watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, XY, and, XX. And then you get to college and it's like, gone. Why? Because they didn't understand it firsthand, You want to understand men and women? You don't teach genetics to them in a classroom. You get married, and you will definitely understand men and women. And you will not understand men and women outside of that. People say, "Oh, I just don't understand women." They're not married. And if you will get married, you will understand women. If you date women, you will understand them a bit, but like you won't really, because the context is wrong. The context is not. It's not a context that's generative and eternal, and unifying. It's like just you observing how they are in the context of you, like having your little goal, but not in the context of growth. And same thing with politics. They're very heavily linked. And so, we're going to talk more about all this stuff. I've been meaning to get into it. I haven't, because I'm still working on stuff. But I hope this was interesting. I'm going to go to the chat. I don't know how long we've been going, but I know everybody had a lot of thoughts about it. I haven't even looked at how many people are watching. I'm going to look right now. 4. It's gone down. I lost some people with some political statements that I made. That's fine, probably. Maybe it's just late, but just know, I will say this, and I'll end with this. Some of my favorite people in the world vote very differently than I do. Some of them, I think, actually thought about their vote. Some of them, I don't. No matter what, they're still some of my favorite people in the world. And that's just important to remember. But also remember that don't watch the news. Or you don't need to watch the news to know anything about politics and what you should, to know what you need to know about politics. You should not watch the news to find it out. You will not find it there. You will find it, in niches that you have experience with and understand. So, humans are multidimensional. Yes, Trump is good. Trump is a human being. Somebody said Jebediah said Trump is good. I voted for Trump. Is he good? Sometimes. Is he bad? Sometimes. He's a human being. Kamala, same thing. That's not the point. Nobody is good and bad. This isn't. I mean, there are people involved in politics who I genuinely think have evil goals, and they are people who are really, like, at this point, I don't even know if they think that it's evil or not, but like there are people that believe that evil things are justified for whatever reasons that they have, whether that is because they have evil goals that are self-serving and destructive and they know it, or whether or not they actually believe they think that this is necessary to keep the peace. But like, if you're involved in doing horrible, immoral things, which many, people in like intelligence agencies and stuff like that have done many times throughout, time. Just didn't give a good example of where that kind of happened more often, because it's done in secret. That's why. That is also evil. The road to, what is it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Sometimes that's definitely true. Very often. Good is, I don't know who's good. God is good, actually. I do know who's good. God is good. God is very good, and thank God God is good. because if God wasn't good, none of us would be here, or or we would be here, and it would be so much worse. There would be nothing good if God wasn't good. Um, and but God is good. Never considered the marriage to vote perspective. Kind of reminds me of Starship Troopers. I don't. Oh, Starship Troopers was you had to like serve in the military to vote. I think, right? That was such an interesting movie because of like the societal, cultural things that went on in the movie. Like the bugs weren't even interesting. It's like their society was interesting. I always liked that movie. Um, but I think in it you have to um, serve in the military to vote. I don't necessarily believe that is should be the case because I don't think serving in the military is like necessarily it doesn't give you like universal human wisdom and unite the two halves of humanity that need to be united. It is I do think that it is important, and I think in like Israel everybody has to serve in the military. There's in general there are exceptions, but like it's the rule is that everybody by default without until you justify an exception you have to serve in the military. I don't the issue and the thing about that is that like the serving in the military there means like protecting your land and like going to the market and while carrying a rifle and like just if anything goes down you are going to defend the people around you. That's what it means like to serve in the military there for the most people, not all the time and not for all people, but for most people, with the exception of like special forces or if they're at war. But and like war. Whereas in the United States, serving in the military usually means leaving home, and I don't agree with that. That is like a good thing for everybody to do, because it. I mean, it's no secret. Like people who serve in the United States military, it destroys families like a lot. It destroys people's potential families and divorces happen and you're not there for your family, like you're just not. And yes, you go home and yes, you're providing income, but you're not there. And you're not really protecting the homeland, like you're protecting the interests of certain people in the homeland and also sometimes everyone in the homeland, but like their interests abroad. You're not protecting them, you're protecting their interests. It's just different. I'm not saying there's no instance in which it's justified. I'm just saying the context matters with that kind of thing. Like the military in Israel is like the border patrol here in the United States. It's not like what we think of as a military here in the United States because we're an empire and they're not. And I'm not saying that being an empire is bad or good or whatever. It's just a fact. Like we have military bases all over the world. This is what the Romans did. This is what the British Empire did. And was it a good thing? It certainly resulted in a lot of good, but it also resulted in some bad. Because people are good and bad. It's not that some people are good and some people are bad. Everybody's good and everybody's bad. The only one who's always good is God. That's it. So with that, please hit the like button. Share this if you found it interesting. I know that I was a little bit, rambly. And I know that these are sensitive subjects. And my goal is not to offend anyone. And I don't want to demean. I don't actually posted something on my Instagram yesterday about like I was like highlighting that there was a trend of like celebrating people who were really upset about the results of the election and kind of like throwing a fit. And if you really believe that, like if you're throwing a fit because maybe it did really impact you, and I mean maybe don't make it public, but like I'm not going to say that being upset is I'm not going to dismiss that. There are legitimate reasons to be upset about an election. There are also not so legitimate reasons to be upset about an election. But usually it's that you've been manipulated into thinking that certain things are going to have an impact that they're not. And, but, you know, don't don't let the not news tell you what is true and not. But I was calling out people who were just, they were like, send me your greatest hits of everybody screaming, and so I can post them for views and stuff. And I hate that. That's not good. Like, it's one thing to like show like somebody who's like a news anchor or like a famous politician or something. Those people are directly involving themselves in the discussion. But if you're just like upset and you lost it and for some reason you posted something that should have been private online, we should not, add to your troubles. It's just cruel. Being cruel is not good. And there's nothing good about it. You can't claim that, oh, we're the good guys, that you're being cruel. Nobody's the good guys, but like you are not being a good guy in that moment. And I saw that a lot from people who voted the same way I did, but I don't agree with how they're acting. And but again, if you don't post, your freakouts online, everybody freaks out, by the way. Everybody thinks they're making fun of everybody who's like freaking out and it was caught on camera doing it. Especially if they were caught on camera, it's different than like them videoing it themselves. Everybody freaks out sometimes. Once I got on here and I got on a live stream a few years ago. It was pretty early on in the channel, and I was going to live stream my work because I was trying to share my screen in a Discord discussion, in a physics Discord, and I couldn't get it to work, so I was going to stream it to YouTube so that they could watch it and we could talk while I was showing it to them. And they did not like the implications of my work and the fact that I even wanted to be involved in the discussion without academic credentials, and they banned me from the Discord while I was setting up the live stream, and it was like going live, and some people really wanted to see it, and then other people who were moderators did not like this at all, and they banned me from the Discord as I was going live, and right as I went live I was banned. And that was the whole point of going live. And I was so mad, and I called that person some names on that live stream. And I think there was only like 4 people were watching, and just like now. No, actually now there's 6 people watching. But and there's one of them who has become a good friend of mine because he participates in our Discord calls, which if you would like to participate in those, send me a private message on Instagram. They're once a week. And it's a very good group. But he just sends me a private message on like Instagram or something, and he's like, "You okay?" And but I caught myself, like, as I was calling this guy names, that I was really pissed, and I was clearly very angry. And I took a second, and I was like, okay, you know what, guys, I've lost control of myself, and I'm going to end the stream, and I'm going to delete this because I lost control of myself. And I did. I'm not gonna, I'll be honest about that. It wasn't like that bad, but it wasn't how I want to be. It's not even just not how I want to be perceived. It's not how I want to be. That is a different thing. We're gonna, it's interesting. I was thinking about like, this is how like subtle languages and how like thinking is really important. And, I was talking to someone that I know who was struggling with, some addiction issues with alcohol. And they were saying to me, like, I want to quit. And I was just thinking about, like, my theory and my work and how it relates, and also just myself. Like, when I want to stop doing something that's a destructive habit, a bad habit, how do I think about it? What is successful? What is the right way to think about it? And also when I want to start doing something that is a constructive habit, like I want to work out or whatever, how should I think about it? How should I say it? And what I realized is that we all say, I want to stop drinking or something like that. But that's usually not actually true. It's usually what's more accurate is that I want to stop drinking. Not I want to stop drinking. I want to stop drinking, but I don't want to stop drinking, so I don't stop drinking. And same thing with like wanting to work out. I say this all the time. I want to work out. I never do. Why? Partially because I say I want to work out and I don't really want to work out. What I want is to want to work out. And you just add that extra word. It changes everything. So, you know, I don't know. Subtle things about thinking matter to even how we are able to be honest with ourselves about certain things, you know, about even our political values. Celebrating sadness. Yeah, don't celebrate sadness of other people. Why would you do that? You can celebrate, you know, your happiness, but don't celebrate other people's sadness. It's very, very feminine and too, and there's nothing wrong with being feminine, but there is something wrong with being feminine if you're not female. Because you can't actually be feminine. It's like a halfway feminine, and that's not enough. But if you're going to be feminine, you got to be really actually feminine, which most men can't actually really do. I think when people say like get in touch with your feminine side, I don't think that we really can very much outside of a relationship with God. I think like my awareness of my feminine side is my submissiveness to God. Like that is my relationship that I have where I'm the feminine and he's the masculine. But in my relationship with people, and especially like, you know, my wife and even just friends and things, there is no, I don't have a feminine side. You know, people say like, oh, it's okay to be in touch with your feminine side. You can cry, you can be sad. That stuff isn't feminine. It's human. Like you can cry and be sad and be very masculine. It's not a feminine thing that you have to get used to. It's just about why you're crying, but it's usually different things that cause it if you're a man. Yeah, I saw it too. The people doing that. Yeah, I hated that. I hate it. They're just people who are like celebrating it and people's sadness and posting stuff like that, and they're just view fishing. I know all those people, by the way. I worked with all of them, and I know that most of them I really like, but I don't like what they're doing, and I called it out. I have no problem doing that. I'm not silent when, you know, quote unquote, my team is, you know, wins, and that's not, but the thing is like, that's the wrong perspective to have. It's not my team versus your team. There are divisions on certain issues. That's absolutely fact. But, the most important divisions are not political parties. It's like, who do you want to be surrounded by if you're a married person who votes Republican and the world falls apart? Do you want to be surrounded by a bunch of married people who voted Democrat? Or do you want to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are not married at all? And it doesn't even matter who maybe they did vote Republican. I would much rather be surrounded by married Democrats, even if I do generally vote Republican, but I vote not for a party. I have voted for Democrats and for Republicans in my life multiple times, based on what I've talked about tonight. The first time President Trump was elected, he looked surprised. I don't think I think he was surprised, but I don't think, like people say, I don't even think he expected to win. That's not true. Nothing about his life has ever been nonsensical like that, in that type of way, where like he just does things and sees what happens. No. He like has a goal. Like, you know, I want to build that hotel, start that business. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they don't. You don't run for president and not expect to win, unless it's a literal joke. And it was not to him. Like, you know, his history. He has been talking and entertaining running for many, 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 many years. Many years. and like since the 80s. And he didn't want to run, but he did. He always said, if it gets bad enough, I will. And he ran once, and he didn't get very far. And I feel like there's something on my nose, like, but I might be allergies. And but then, you know, you get old, and and he ran again. I will say this, like him or dislike him, people try and like people try to, and I'm guilty of this too, always project their own like assumptions about the character of people. Like, he only cares about himself. She hates you, you know, and these types of people. That is not useful. And it's not something that you should operate on and trust, because you do not know that person. Just operate on what you know, and what you know that you can know, not what you think you know, but what you know that you can know. And definitely do not make decisions based on like you making assumptions about the internal thoughts and feelings of somebody who you've never met in your life ever. I'm not saying you don't, you know, intuition doesn't exist, but you know, Trump has selfish and selfless motives for running for president. Kamala Harris has selfless and selfish motives for running for president. And that is fine. Fine. Does Trump care about his legacy being, you know, and you know, prestige that comes with being president? Oh, of course. Who doesn't? If you were elected president, wouldn't you care? Like, you would care. So does Kamala Harris. Do they also both want to probably do good for the country? Yeah, for at least a lot of it. And I mean, you don't get shot at, and specifically speaking about Trump, like, you do not get shot at and go from being like one of the most loved people in the country, which Trump was. Like, you might not remember, but like, everybody liked Donald Trump. Everybody in New York liked him. He like redid Central Park for everybody when the city couldn't do it. And he gave him, like, people loved him after that. There, he was in Home Alone, like, he was on Oprah, and he was on The View, and everybody liked him. It was just after he started running for president that we were told to hate him. And you don't have to like him, but like, we were told to hate him by the not news. And you don't have to vote for him to admit that. Like, I would respect you if you were like, yeah, that's true, but you know, that doesn't matter to why I'd vote for him. It shouldn't matter to why you vote for him. That is irrelevant to why you should vote for somebody. It's just because if somebody tells you you should hate them, you shouldn't love them because of that. You know, that's you're not thinking if you're doing that. You shouldn't love any politician, but you shouldn't support a politician just because the establishment is against them. Maybe the establishment's right, maybe they're not, but you can't figure that out without thinking about it. And, you know, but being humble is the only way that allows you to think, because it's the most important quality in a scientist, or in a thinker in general, in a person in general, is because if you're not honest with yourself if somebody isn't honest with themselves about themselves, then you can't actually be honest about anything. You know, how are you going to be honest about things outside of, you know, that are beyond you, if you're not even honest about you? The interpretation bridge between, you know, everything comes through you, you know. So if you're not honest with yourself about yourself, you can't be sensible about anything beyond yourself. You know, you got to recognize, like, I'm not always a good person. Sometimes I do bad things. Sometimes my motives are selfish. Sometimes they're selfless. I have multiple, you know, different, you know, aspects of how I've acted in my life. That's true of everybody. There's no good guys and bad guys. I'm not going to say that. It's not that you shouldn't think about it as good guys and bad guys. It's that everybody can do good and everybody can do bad. So the question isn't who's good and who's bad. The question is, what is good. You don't even have to figure out necessarily what is bad, but like if you figure out what is good, then you will know what is bad. You know, when I first started thinking about politics, I started writing something. It was like an essay, and it was called like "We Are All Evil." It was like I realized the ignorance of my own ignorance, if I was given power, could lead to me doing things to people that that harmed them without even me knowing it, and with having the good intentions, but or you know, at least not bad intentions. And and I started writing it, and I stopped eventually, but before I finished. But I just think about it, and you know, it did make me think about right and wrong. And it's funny because I had this boss at the time, and he was Mormon, and I was an atheist. And he said, I'll end with this. And he said, do you believe, he was like, I believe in objective morality. And I was like, that's crazy. Why would you even think that? Don't you know, like, Hitler thought what he was doing was good. And I thought he was so ignorant for thinking, you know, for saying that there was an objective morality. But I didn't even realize like that I was being incoherent. Like, of course I believed in right and wrong and bad and good at the time. But I didn't even think about like, because I was thinking about it from the context of like the classroom context, this detached context that doesn't take you into account, your experience into account. I just was thinking about like history outside of experience. And then all you think about is that people who thought they were doing good did what, you know, things that we call bad. And it's like, okay, but even in admitting that and stating that, you're kind of admitting that there is a right and wrong. And and if you had just asked me in a different context than politics or history, if there was an objective morality, then I would have been able to answer it. But I also didn't even know what that meant. If you asked me, are some things the wrong thing? I would have been like, yeah. But then if you were like, oh, do you believe in objective morality? I would be like, no, don't you realize like everybody thinks they're doing the right thing? No, I didn't even realize that I didn't understand. It's the problem with the classroom context. And then I had I saw the impact of politics on my life firsthand, and I was prevented from being able to do something good that isn't necessary. And I realized that, like, you know, it's not about intentions. And even with the best intentions, like, that doesn't mean that the action is good, which means you have to divorce the person from the action. You should, you know, people will be like, don't judge people. But you have to judge actions. You do. And starting with your own actions, like we have to judge our own actions first, or else if we don't judge our own actions, we can't judge anyone else's actions. We just can't. It's the same thing as like the whole thing I just said about what I had said about objective morality. I couldn't even, until I united those two things, my own personal experience, thinking about myself, like, would it be wrong if I stole? Yeah, it would be wrong. But, you know, the media screws us up, and school screws us up. I mean, even think about like, I don't know, there's so many shows and things where it's like the good guys are thieves and like they're likable thieves. They're like charismatic thieves, like the Italian Job. Those, you think they're the good guys because they steal people's stuff. But the only reason why they're the good guys is because the guy who's really the bad guy, who's represented as the bad guy in that, is like worse than them. Like he double crosses his own thieves who are friends who are thieves with him, and shoots them and kills them. It's like that. You're still stealing. Like everybody's bad at that in that movie. There's nobody good in that movie. Not a single person is good in that movie. Every single person is a thief. Or I don't want to say, no, not a single person is good in that movie. Every single person in that movie is kind of like, they are all thieves Like, and they're not just it's not just that they stole. It's like they intentionally made their life goals to steal. It's a little different than like, yeah, I stole this once and I was wrong. It's like, no, I've made my job to steal other people's things because I like the money and the rush or something. But you know, but I don't use guns, so I'm a good guy. That's what, this it's just how much our media can destroy perspective and morality. Like Star Wars, even like they with Han shot first, and they changed it so that like Greedo comes to kill him in the first Star Wars, and he points a gun at him, and he's like, "I'm taking you to your death." And then in the original, Han just has his gun underneath the table, and he's like, "Okay, I bet you are," but really he's like, "No, no, you're not," and he shoots him. It's self-defense. It's totally self-defense. If somebody points a gun at you and says, "I'm taking you to your death," do whatever you can to defend your life. Anything is justified. Anything. Shoot them first before they shoot you. But they changed it so that Greedo shot at Han first, missed him from 2 feet, which doesn't make any sense, and then Han shoots him. Because it's like the classroom has entered the media, and now it's trying to teach us a lesson about like what is good and bad outside the context of good and bad in firsthand. And so now we have to like create an artificial context, which doesn't make sense. If you watch it, he's like, "I'm taking you to death." Okay, then why did you shoot him after? Why did you try and shoot him? If you're like, "I'm taking you to death," doesn't make any sense. So not only does it make the story incoherent, but it also doesn't teach you anything about morality. Whereas the original one did. Somebody says, "I'm taking you to your death," kill them if you can before they take you to your death. You don't have to wait until like you get there. If you do that, you might get there. So, I mean, the news does this to us about politics. And just recognize that Star Wars is entertainment, and it's not where morality is learned, and the news is not. Recognize that, and vote for who you think is best. That's like, but who you think is best, and you got to do the work. It's tough, and it's not about like figuring them out first. You got to figure out what is valuable to you first. Then you can look at them. You don't even have to look at a candidate until you know what's valuable to you. And not what you like and enjoy, but like what you need. That's what you need to look at. Division makes it easier to hurt people. Yes, it does. Men versus women, rich versus poor. That's all division that's artificial. There's no reason why the rich need to be against the poor at all. Like that's natural. It's just not. Everybody's trying to make as much money as possible. To some degree, like within the context of their own values. That's true. But some people value money more than others, but that's not a problem either. And it doesn't mean that like just because somebody makes more money doesn't mean that everybody suffers. It's not a fixed pot. It's not a finite pot. Even Bitcoin, people are like, "Oh, Bitcoin isn't. It's not printed." I get that, and yes, that changes valuation and stuff like that. But if something is infinitely divisible, it's kind of like, it's not like it's a finite resource either. It's not. Like, and if it doesn't have intrinsic value, then its value is going to range. And I'm not saying Bitcoin isn't amazing and has like its own totally unique things about it. It does. But we haven't even seen the potential of Bitcoin yet. But I'm not like a Bitcoin person, but I recognize it's unique and there's amazing things about it, and it's probably not going anywhere. But meaning like it's probably going to stick around is what I mean. But yeah, it's still like no people who like you don't. It's not people will be like get it while you can. It's like you're going to be able to get it because it's if it's exchanged between people and it's infinitely divisible. Like you're going to be able to get some. How much? I don't know, but like it's going to eventually correlate to how much you produce in some way. Non-relative value judgments are relative to fixed goal hierarchies. Non-relative value judgments are relative to fixed goal hierarchies. I think that there's a better word to say what you're saying, but I get it. It's that non-relative value judgments are contextualized by fixed goal hierarchies. It's a bit more accurate, but I think it's close. I'm not saying what I just said is as accurate as you could get. You could probably get more accurate, but that's more accurate, I think, than like saying that they're relative to fixed goal hierarchies. But it's, there's dual meaning to like relative. Relative means like, it can mean how far are you in the chain of steps, but it could also mean how close and far in a spectrum, which are two different things. A series of steps has a finite series of steps. A spectrum is a continuum. It's different. Fixed goal hierarchies are theology. Yes. This is why, idol worship is seen as the worst of all, commandments that you can break. It's the most important commandment to keep. That's what I'll say. It's a better. I don't want to be you don't want to be anti. You want to be for something. So, because that's how you build. And so you're affirming of something, and you are firm on something. If you're not affirming something and you're denying something, then you're just dying. It's like there's a reason they even sound similar. I'm not saying I know all the reasons, but that's not a coincidence. That's meaningless either. And it's very easy to idol worship in politics. Trump is not going to save the empire from falling. It's falling. It's okay. Rome fell, and people continued to live in Italy and happily, especially if they were surrounded by other married people. But and that happens everywhere in the world. It's okay, but maybe it will be replaced. You could build something better in certain instances, but not rooting for the downfall of the country, but I'm acknowledging the reality that we're just too divided, and we're divided in our moral hierarchies and our goals. That's what it is. And it's not even that Republicans are united and Democrats are united. That's not where the division is. That is not when everything falls apart. Those things will not matter at all. They will not. Who you were registered with, what party, who you voted for, none of it's going to matter. Your life goals and your lifestyle is what is going to actually be the determining factor in who's the group that you associate with, or who is your group. And not all of those groups are going to persist. That's for sure. Just like there's a single way to think, there's a single way for society to be too, actually. There's not multiple different societal, different ways of building a society. No, you can vary the details in and change them up in certain times, but the mechanism is the same everywhere. It just is. You can call it a king or you can call it a president. And is there differences? Yeah, a little bit. But are those differences really that relevant to like the rest of society? No, definitely not. But you tell me which society is growing and flourishing, and the majority of people are not married. Or you point to it, even not even just today, anywhere in history. Find it. I'll give you $10. Venmo. I really will. You won't find it. You just won't. I've looked, but go for it. Try. I'll give you $10 if you can do it, but you won't be able to, because where are they now? Like if you found them in history, but they're no longer here, that doesn't get you the $10. They have to still be here, because that's what it's how you continue. But anyways, thank you everybody. Please hit the like button, and I hope I didn't, my goal isn't to offend people, but my goal isn't to avoid offending people either. My goal is to just be honest and like kind, and that's my goal, I guess. And so I hope I achieved that. Peace.